We're going to give it a couple more minutes and then we'll start. Okay, we might as well get started. I just want to remind everybody to use the microphone. And the microphone works better if it's closer to you than it is way out in the middle of the room. And so we'll get started. Introductions first, Dr. Cog.
Ron Papsdorf, Dr. Cog, Transportation Director.
Okay, Central Front Range.
Central Front Range, Dwayne McFall, Fremont County.
Okay, Eastern,
Gary Beatty.
Grand Valley.
Dana Brosig, and I'm also joined with Rachel Peterson is on the line.
Okay, Gunnison Valley, I'm Vince Rogalski and I'm chairman of the STAC and I'm also chairman of the Gunnison Valley Transportation Planning Region. Intermountain. Okay, North Front Range.
John Mallow here with Suzette Mallet.
Okay, where's Johnny?
I'm his replacement today. Sorry about that.
Northwest.
Heather Sloop, Northwest TPR.
Okay, Pike Peak.
John Santos, Transportation Director.
Okay, now I'm working. John Leosados, Chief Troublemaker, and Holly Williams, Second Troublemaker. Actually, I'm the boss, but.
Pueblo area. Pueblo area. Okay. South Central.
Brian Blasey and Luis Lopez.
Southeastern.
Stephanie Gonzalez, Southeast.
Southwest.
Sarah Hill, Southwest.
Upper Front Range.
John Becker, Upper Front Range.
Elizabeth Relford.
Okay, Southern Ute. Ute Mountain.
Brendan Adams with Ute Mountain Ute.
Okay, Bill.
Thanks, Vince. Bill Haas, Federal Highway Administration.
Okay, Federal Transit.
Good morning. Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. Emma Belmont with the Federal Transit Administration. Thanks.
Okay. I'd like to introduce everybody in the room, so we'll start there. I'm looking right at you.
Turn your video if I need help.
William.
Kim Funk, CDOT Region 5. Good morning, Jordan Riddle, CDOT Region 1.
Morning, CDOT Regional Planning.
Okay, so was there anybody on the internet that we've missed?
Yeah, I didn't hear San Luis Valley, Vince, but I'm here for the San Luis Valley, Bernhurst, St. Alamos County.
Okay, anybody else?
Ron Cook, Southeast. Ron Cook, Southeast.
And Becky Carrasco with North Front Range.
And Brian Sturkmanek from Northwest DPR.
Okay, so we'll move along. Approval of the minutes.
Sorry, I'm a little bit late.
Oh,
Eva
we-
Cosaleon, PACOG.
Thought we got everybody in the room, but you just came in.
I just came in.
Okay, welcome. So the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the March meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
Holly Williams, so moved.
Is there a second? Thank you. Is there any corrections or additions? Is there anybody that disagrees with approving the minutes? I'll consider the minutes approved. Okay, Herman, we're going to do an update on current events.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Vincent. Good to see everybody here in person today. I'm going to give a quick update on US 50 for my update, and then I'll turn it over to Jason Smith and he can give us an update as well. So you've probably, there goes my slides. You've probably already heard that US 50 between Montrose and Gunnison is closed. So a while back, FHWA asked all the states to do comprehensive inspections on these high-strength steel bridges, these T1 steel bridges. So we have 8,000 bridges in the state. It took a long time to get through which ones needed to be considered. If you can go to the next slide here. Which ones needed to be considered. And we only had 2 in the state, and they're both over Blue Mesa Reservoir. So just to orient yourselves, you can see Gunnison in the middle of the map, Montrose in the far left of the map. You can see the Blue Mesa Reservoir. There's 2 bridges over that have been closed, or 1 bridge that's been closed, 2 that were inspected. So next slide. So we'll call the first bridge A is the bridge that isn't closed. We did a detailed inspection on that one. We didn't see any cracks, any visible cracks. So at some point we will go back and do something more comprehensive. But thankfully we were able to keep that one open because we didn't have the visible cracks like we found on Bridge B, which is the longer bridge, the one on the right-hand side of the map you see. When we closed the bridge April 18th, it's because we found that crack. And because these are fracture critical bridges, spans, if there's one problem, we need to close it because it doesn't have a redundant support. So the detours over highways is I-70 to the north, US 160 to the south. They're 354 miles and 6 hours travel time if you take the I-70 detour, 331 miles and 7 hours travel time if you take the southern detour. Next slide. So that's why we've been working with Gunnison County to get County Road 26 open early. We've spent a lot of time and effort on County Road 26 that greatly reduces that travel time. We're also punching through Kebler Pass. That'll be another route once that highway dries out. Both of these, or particularly Kebler Pass, isn't scheduled to be open for probably a month from now. But we're able to, because we punched through the snow there, we're thinking we can get that one open in the next couple of weeks. On County Road 26, we're having to do pilot car escorts. So we have two trips, one in each direction in the morning and then in the evening. And on Friday, we're planning to open that up to, or the county planning to open it up to 4 trips in each direction to get people to and from Gunnison and Montrose. Next slide. All right, so the bridges.
Herman, let me make a comment about County Road 26 and Kebler Pass.
Yeah.
These are not highways. So they can only take so much on different types of vehicles. Right now, the one that's open 26 can only deal with trucks that are less than 16,000 pounds. So no semis. And so the thing of it is the detours are for local people, basically, not the onslaught of all kinds of campers and trailers and all kinds of other stuff that's going to be happening shortly because of tourism. So these are local bypasses or shortcuts to Montrose or to Gunnison. So you need to be real careful about what you're driving over these roads. Okay, thanks.
Right, and it is any vehicles over 16,001 gross vehicle weight are prohibited from being on County Road 26. So those larger vehicles are all having to take that longer detour. Yeah. So this is a picture of the bridge that we've closed. There's 3 spans that are fracture critical. I've always wanted to say cantilever out loud, so I'm probably going to use it wrong in this case. But if you can see span 5 and span 7, they reach out a little bit over the pier, and span 6 doesn't have a pier. It's supported by the connection to span 5 and 7 in that steel. Next slide. So also I'll let you know that the commission chair Karen Stewart early last week allowed us to, through an emergency contracting procedure, to get $10 million, which will be confirmed by the commission when they meet here in a couple of weeks, to just get started. Mobilization, bridge inspections, improvements to County Road 26, Kebler Pass. That's not going to be near enough. We'll be going back to the commission probably for another 10 or 20 million to keep things going. You can see here the crack of span 6. On the left-hand side, it's before we removed the paint. On the right-hand side, it's with the paint removed. So the challenge that we have, because we need to do ultrasonic testing, we have to remove the paint to be able to see what else is going on. So in the spots, there's 118 of them. In the spots that we've removed the paint, and done the ultrasonic testing, we have found additional cracks. So those need to be confirmed and retested and everything, but that's the challenge that we're facing. There's 118 spots where we need to do this. Next slide. So we started with, this is span 6. It can't hold much weight. So they've been using ropes initially to get down and do the inspections and even starting some of the paint removal. So you can see the challenge that presents when we have to do this in 118 different spots and remove paint. So next slide. Spans 5 and 7, because they're supported by those piers, we did get truck mounted access. So for the inspections we're doing on those 2 spans, it's a little bit better with the truck support. Next slide. And as of last week, we got some lightweight scaffolding. I think we've now constructed a second set of lightweight scaffolding that will allow us to not just dangle by ropes, but to get down on the platforms and do some of the underside testing that we weren't able to do up to this point. Next slide. All right, this is my last slide. So this is the ultrasonic testing. And again, it just shows the challenge that we face of having to scrape the sand or blast the paint off. We also had a bit of a scare last week. Some of the underneath the paint is this black gooey substance that with some photos, it looked an awful lot like asbestos. So we did the testing. That test came back very quickly and it's negative. We don't have asbestos, but we do think there could be some zinc and potentially some other metals that have similar kinds of restrictions on how we go about it. So we've brought in the hazmat type gear that would be needed, making an assumption that there's zinc and other metals in the paint. We'll get that test back tomorrow. At least that's the plan, and we'll find out whether there's anything to be concerned about there. Let's see if I had anything else I wanted to mention before I turn it over. So there's going to be a lot of steel. Steel can be hard to come by. We've been doing a search for the last 2 weeks to try to acquire the steel that might be needed for the repairs. Still don't know how much steel that's going to be. We're also designing. We have 5 different repair options. We've been actively designing at least 3 of those options. So hopefully, once we know what we need to do and once the fix is, we'll be able to get the steel. We'll already have it designed and we can move forward as quickly as possible. So with that, I'll stop. And well, I'll just say that the goodwill has really been tremendous. It's amazing how understanding folks have been with the situation that we're in. That only lasts so long. But well, we've done one public meeting. We had about 800 people there. We're doing another hybrid virtual meeting next Tuesday to talk about it some more and to give some updates. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason, see if he has anything he wants to add.
No, I did a great job, Herman. Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions and specific details that's going on. A lot of coordination and effort at this time with the team. It's changing daily and things are progressing as we're out there. The conditions are kind of extreme, even though we're past winter, thank goodness. When we found this, we're in spring. There's heavy winds daily. And so we're having to change more to a night operation. So it creates its own challenges for us as well. But the team's adapting and doing the best they can. And I think we're heading, hopefully in the next few weeks, to find us a solution and start really working on that and turning this into more of a project to get the structure reinforced. Any questions from anybody?
Thanks, Vince. That's all I had, but just I wanted to let folks know that I have a meeting upstairs at 9, and I hate to do that since we're in person, but I will be back after that meeting. Thanks.
Okay, so one of the things always the question is when's it going to be done? And the answer is nobody knows. The thing of it is we haven't decided, or CDOT hasn't decided exactly how many cracks do exist. Like they were saying, they found the main one, and this is on basic inspection. And then they found 3 more. So they're really looking at all of the joints and the various things. So once the inspection is complete and they've identified all the problems, then they can think about the repair and how long that's going to take. And so once they get to that point, they may have an estimate at the time it's going to be reopened. In the meantime, it's going to be difficult. And one of the other things that comes along, not because of this, but just comes along, is people had a lot of trouble with Blue Creek Canyon in the past 4 years and trying to deal with the stoppage and time of waiting to go over the highway in one direction at a time. Well, guess what? Little Brew Creek is starting construction again next week. And they hope to finish by mid-July. But, you know, one is the other, and they're only about 4 or 5 miles apart. And so once you get on the other side of the bridge, you still have to go through Blue Creek. So we got a lot of things that are happening. Go ahead, Ron.
Sorry, Herman, have you determined for sure it's a repair operation and not a replace operation?
I don't, Jason, what do you know?
Yeah, we haven't completely determined yet. We don't think at this time it'll be a replacement. And even if it was what we would say a replacement, it would just be more of a superstructure replacement, which is more that bridge deck. The piers are in good shape and very sound. So, you know, right now we're really focused on, you know, the effort of more of a plating kind of exercise, like Herman referred to as was more of these tension splices in these areas and isolated, localized kind of repairs. But, you know, depending on the amount that we find with this UT testing, this could expand bigger and bigger. And at some point we make the call of really starting to replace more of those girders and the deck itself. But we're not there yet.
Yeah, and I would add that we just got some picture. I wish I would have remembered this. I would have put it in the slideshow, but the bridge was built before the water was there. So if there was a full replacement with the piers, that's much more difficult than it was back in the 60s when these were built.
Yeah, about 1963 is when the bridges were put together. So once they got the bridges put together, then they could start filling the reservoir with water. And I think at Blue Mesa Reservoir is the largest reservoir in the state of Colorado, so holds a lot of water.
I'll just talk. So my only statement would be that I hope that we're looking at, or CDOT is looking at a resiliency plan for the summer and into the fall and into the winter and into the spring for all of the things that can occur when I-70 shuts down and we don't have a lot of reroutes, because then that reroute turns into US 40, which means that's a 100% effect to Northwest TPR. And I don't know if we could handle that much traffic. We've done somewhat of a lot, I would say 70%, but I don't know if we could do 100% if this is the new scary norm. And I would love to know, when do you guys pull the trigger, like Ron said, to say, how much money is enough? Do we just replace the superstructure? Because that turns into, are we spending $10 million? I get it. You got to figure out what's wrong. But at $4 million, do we go, okay, this is bigger than what's wrong. We just need to go, let's start designing the new superstructure. To me, that's really great engineering to make those big calls. And I think we do have a great engineering department. So are those conversations being had as to what the line is literally to when you say, stop spending the money, let's start designing a replacement?
So one of the things is if I-70 goes down, 50 was one of the detours for that. And 40 going up through Steamboat was another one. So if 50 is not available for backup detour, then that one road's going to have all the traffic. And so the thing of it is can you handle it on the freeway? Yeah, maybe. But what about one of the other 2-lane or even 4-lane roads in the state? So we have to make sure that, as Heather was saying, what is our resiliency plan? And I know we've been working on several of the different versions of that, but it really is amazing when you actually can feel being cut off from what your normal operation is and how long that's going to be. So anyway, questions, more further questions. Okay.
I didn't get my answer.
So they'll be happy to jump in there, Vince, and kind of provide some details. So we're really concurrently working with like 3 designs right now, trying to explore the different options. And with all 3 of them, looking at scope, schedule, and budget, right? So we can have a good comparison as we start to make a decision. As we find more of these findings, it's going to start narrowing down to which one we're going to do. There's a huge difference though between the timelines. I mean, if we can keep this as more of a localized repair and not adding a lot of extra weight to these girders, then you don't have to do that in reinforcement of the girders itself because of that dead load that you're adding. Now, if we start adding too much weight with this plate steel, these gussets that we'd have to put on, then we're going to have to reinforce the entire structure or go to that replacement. Those start to really push the timeline way out. We start talking a substantial amount more of time and also money, because you really, to pull that off, the specialized equipment and the location of where we're working, it definitely need more impact. All the designs we're doing right now, we're looking long-term though. We're not doing this a fix for a couple of years. This structure is 63 years old, but it's in really good shape overall. It's just these weld areas that we're finding. And honestly, a lot of these, when we call them findings, they're anomalies that were built into the weld itself 63 years ago or 60 years ago. So they didn't have the techniques to check the welds back then. It was radiography. It didn't do as thorough of a job as checking as what we're doing right now with this ultrasonic testing. This ultrasonic now gives us these hairline cracks, and it also gives us little air pockets. That's some of the findings that we're picking up now. Well, some of these were in there, whenever this bridge was built. So it sounds worse than it is. There's some cracks, definitely, that are concerning, and we're looking at those. Those have to be repaired, but overall, we're still trying to keep this design and repair, again, as cheap, as efficient, but we want to get that long-term out of it to get the full life of this structure, which is at least another 20, 25 years if possible.
Are you guys at all talking with our friends up in Wyoming for a longer range resiliency reroute if 70 goes down, to go up onto 80 and not put it through 40? Because I mean, I'm sorry, but that is going to crush the Northwest road system, and we're not getting any more money to fix it. And the solution to reroute everybody through a US 40 system is not a good solution. So I'm hoping that somebody's speaking with our friends in Wyoming about an 80 resiliency plan. And I'm not the only one that just thought about that, because that scares the crap out of me. I mean, it's terrifying what that will do to the road system, not just even that, but the communities up north.
We haven't expanded most conversations. Right now, we're still working with locals in the counties, trying to figure out these local detour routes. But as you brought up, we start to understand how long these impacts are going to last. We need to start looking at all the options, right? We've already gone through some scenario planning of, what happens if something on I-70 at a certain location, if it goes down, what would be the alternate routes? Where can we put traffic? What are we going to do? There's so many different scenarios you can go based off of the different locations that we have risk, on I-70. Every one of the situations are different, and we would route in different ways with the locals. But it is very concerning, right? Whenever we have one of our major routes that's impacted for long-term here, that it adds risk completely. And we need to be looking at what we're going to do. I think we need to expand to other states and start having discussions. We are routing trucks right now, the best we can. We're starting to advertise that out further. So hopefully they're starting to get the message, so 50 is not getting used, and they're going to start pushing some to the south if it's easier. And then others maybe will start going to the north more.
Okay, because the only thing that we can't control is weather, and that's fire, rain, and snow, and avalanches. And shockingly enough, all of those things happened on 70 in the last 5 years. So
Yeah.
that's my concern.
Yeah, and I'd also say when we gave our agenda briefing to our commission chair and vice chair earlier this week, we said we're going to talk about US 50. They said, could you build in some conversation about resiliency and redundancy? So they're thinking that same thing as you.
So, and just a little reminder that it snowed last week and okay, so snow isn't over yet. To talk about a little bit of resiliency and innovation of some of the locals, you know, one of the things that's happened is people on the west side of the bridge have kids that go to school in Gunnison. So how do you deal with that? Well, what they've done is arrange a ferry system where they'll pick up the kids on one side in a boat, move them to the other side to the bridge, to the school buses, and then pick them up in the end of the day. So, you know, some of the locals are being very intuitive and initiative building in terms of getting things taken care of. So just a thought.
Vince,
Yes.
Holly Williams, I have a question. Well, I guess I have more of a statement than a question because the questions have already been asked and answered. I couldn't tell you the number of years that we've had a congressman or a senator on the National Transportation Committee, but it might be really useful if you contacted Senator Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett and Congresswoman Boebert, although she's obviously in an election and a little harder to get a hold of right now. Because when we get congressionally directed funding bills again this year, it would seem to me that we might want to get some extra money for something, because this has been 4 years now that people have not been going through that route. It's got to start affecting the economy at some point in Montrose. And that's not fair to Montrose to have a route shut down like this all the time. And so we've got to find a way to build some redundancy into this road for the local communities, in all honesty. And I don't, you know, that might be something that that will obviously be something that will be done when I'm long gone. But we've got to find a way to build up some sort of redundancy fund. So when we have problems with Glenwood Canyon, we have problems with this route over to Montrose and over US 50, we need to have some redundancy built in so that we have some kind of emergency fund to do some serious things with. I don't know how far down the water level is, but, or how much deeper it goes. I can see how far down it is, but you know, it might be worthwhile at some point to consider how you ever going to get a new bridge over there. I mean, I'll say that's the glass half full side. On the glass half empty, the Air Force Academy Chapel, when they started rehabbing it, they built that in the 1960s, and it's going to take 8 years and a whole heck of a lot more money. So it's just a big box right now to make sure that it can work. That's obviously a historical building with different problems, but a bridge in a reservoir is a really big problem too. So, you know, finding those redundant systems, we've got to find a way to build around that somehow.
So one of the interesting things is, you know, when we started Blue Creek Canyon, there was a lot of turmoil about closing it even for, you know, an hour or two. And the size of the load going over the temporary repair. And a lot of feedback was given to us from logging industry that they wanted to get logging trucks over that road. And there was a question whether the logging trucks would fit on 92 as a detour. Well, this time we're getting ranchers. I got cattle on the other side. How do I get them on this side? I need to feed those cattle over there, and my feed is on this side. And so there's a cattle industry, agricultural stuff that's really kind of impacting us now in terms of how do they keep their business and their animals going and all this type of thing. And so they're working with the Department of Agriculture and trying to figure some of those things out. So interesting things come up when various things happen. Other questions? Okay, thank you. Anything else, Herman? Okay, thanks. Okay, so we got the commission report. Now, we didn't have a meeting last month, but the commission did, so we've got 2 months of meetings in your packet, and I'm only gonna go over one. And the thing of it is, I may be speaking about either one. And so you all have a copy of the commission report, and I was looking at it initially and saying, you know, the date is wrong on that. You know, we should be having April minutes. No, it's March minutes. That's because we didn't approve or we had a chance to review the March meeting, and now we're into May, and so we're trying to get the April stuff together. Okay, let's see. Got too many pages here. So one of the things I wanted to mention was the fact that we each get a report of the legislative bills that go before the session. And so that was been very helpful to a couple of us that I know about, that hopefully that helps you in looking at some of the bills that you might want to comment and keep you up to date on what's going on. So the legislative body is going to be over here in another week. So April, you know, one of the things that we had to do is get the budget ready. So we have discussions about the budget in both March and April. And we looked at it in our March meeting and recommended that the commission move forward with it. So the governor, I don't know if the governor's had it already or he's getting it. Because it's been budget for 24-25. Go ahead, Darius.
Sorry to interrupt you, Chair, but I believe the governor has signed the long bill.
Okay, so there it is. The Bridge Tunnel Enterprise has gone into getting some more money through funding, through loans, and I think it's 150 million. And so that was been worked on and approved. And so now they can move forward with some of the projects and have money to continue doing the bridge work. Speaking of bridges, by the way. Transit connection. You know, one of the big things that we're trying to do with greenhouse gases is to reduce the amount of individual driving. So we had a presentation, the commission had a presentation on transit connection. And the Department of Transit is reviewing all the connections and the various routes that Mustang, the various other subsidiaries of that, trying to connect all the areas in the state. And so, and you know, and you heard about Mountain Rail, and so they're working on Mountain Rail to get up through to Craig. One of the problems there is the Moffett Tunnel, and the Moffett Tunnel lease is over, so they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with that so they can keep going through the tunnel. And so Paul DeRocher has been working hard at trying to see where we're going to go in the future with transit. You know, one of the things that was going to happen in the Gunnison Valley TPR was there were going to be a bus from Montrose to Gunnison and Gunnison to Montrose. And they were going to get that going as soon as the Little Blue Creek Canyon was complete. Now we have a bridge problem, so that's going to slow it up a little bit too, depending on how long it takes to repair that. STIP. There was a STIP discussion last month, and that's been moving forward. So Darius explained the procurement and the eco interactive software that they're trying to put together. Darius.
So yeah, to make a long story short, the current module that we have in SAP to use to do STIPing activities and develop the STIP, it's called public budget formulation. It's not going to be supported after, I think, 2027. So we're procuring the Eco Interactive solution to replace that going forward. Probably you'll see that with the next step. We're currently in contracting to develop, to gain access to that software and start development on that. So the current STIP still uses our current solution, but next time we'll probably have something different. And that's the that's about it for that talk.
Thank you. I could almost not pronounce that. One of the other things that there was a presentation on is greenhouse gas, and Dr. Cog presented some things on the greenhouse gas activities that they were doing, and things seem to be right on track. And so with that moving forward, one of the interesting things and encouraging things is the fact that there were some awards at the end of the meeting, and they were for environmental activities that some of the people working with CDOT have done. Navigating regulatory requirements by embracing partnership in using bats, the bats. And so the fact that they were really, this one person is really interested in making sure the bat population is stable and healthy. And there was I can't remember what they called it, the white nose bat. And then another environmental award was given to steel sister beam installation on timber bridges. How do you keep timber bridges going? What kind of maintenance do they do? So they're sistering metal beams along the wooden beams in these bridges, and that's been very successful. Let's see. There were a couple others too. There was a study about a particular piece of property dealing with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and the Fish and Wildlife people were a part of it. And I don't have enough information to really go over what the project was, but that was another award in dealing that. And that would enable that piece of property that was isolated to be connected to the state park system. So that worked out well. So you all have a lot of pages of 2 months of the commission efforts. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Our TPR reports. Well, I'll tell you, I'll give mine right away. You already had it. It's about the 50. And we're going to be talking a little bit about central land thing, and we'll have a presentation on that. And we've had 2 different projects done with that. One is a Cottonwood Pass in our area, different from the Cottonwood Passes in other areas. And that was looking to be finishing the paving on one side, because the other side was already paved. And that project was completed using funds from this particular project. And I'm talking about Gunnison County, Gunnison Transportation Planning Region now. And so that's 1. 2, the second one is the Little Blue Creek Canyon. And half of that was funded by federal lands. And so I'm just trying to bring up that the presentation later today in our meeting is important, and that we should think about projects in our own area that might fit and be able to get funding from that particular area. And they, as an organization, are trying to sister cooperate with CDOT and using some of the monies from both areas to complete a bunch of projects. And I think that's a really good thing. So let's go down with Dr. Cog.
Cover this morning, everybody, Ron Papsdorf. Just the Dr. Cog Board of Directors has met twice since the last STAC meeting, so a couple of highlights. On March 20th, appreciate CDOT staff. Erica Denny presented to the Board of Directors on the statewide freight plan update effort. The board had a really robust conversation. It was really notable. The amount of the cost impact on the movement of commodities and freight around the state that's a result of delays that occur in the Denver region on the freight system was notable to the board during that presentation. But appreciate Erica being at the board. The board also selected 5 projects for funding through our community-based transportation planning program. This is a relatively new program at Dr. Cog where we're working with historically disadvantaged communities to do more local transportation planning work, to work with them to identify their local transportation needs and work with them to find solutions to those more local needs. And then at the April 17th meeting, the board approved an update to the taking action on Regional Vision Zero plan. That's our regional safety plan. The effort was really focused on taking a fresh look at the strategies and actions identified in the plan that was first adopted in 2020. And there's been a lot of changes in the last 4 years. So it was really a refresh of what can we do as a region to make better progress on addressing transportation fatalities. Since Vince mentioned it, we are in the process of an update to our long-range regional transportation plan, which is the reason why under the greenhouse gas rule, we did a new greenhouse gas analysis under the state's greenhouse gas rule and the presentation of the greenhouse gas transportation report to the commission, which the commission accepted. That amendment won't be effective until the next board meeting when we'll ask them to take action on the amendment formally. That's all.
Thank you. Central Front Range.
Hey, Dwayne McFall, Central Front Range, TPR chairman. So a couple of quick highlights. We offered to all members a red line bylaws. We will probably approve those bylaws in our next meeting next month. We're also reaching out to municipalities within the TPR that haven't been involved or active at all in the TPR, trying to get some more members of that with IGAs. I think there's a pandemic going around with bridges. We have a bridge closed in our county that is under repair. It's been over 2 months so far, and we're still not going on that. Thank God it doesn't have a lot of traffic across it. But I just wonder, a question, was there a different way that they were checking bridges maybe or something? Because what is wrong with this particular bridge should have been found long before this year. And it seems like they're finding a lot of bridges all of a sudden. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Eastern TBR.
Yeah, we haven't had any of our TPR meetings since the last time we met, but projects are getting going on 71 and I-70 and the other construction projects in our region. I did attend a couple freight advisory subcommittee, their advisory committee last week. One interesting one on the environmental subcommittee was a presentation on hydrogen fuel and trying to figure out how that could fit in for distribution and stuff for heavy duty trucks. And I see has potential, but there's a lot of hurdles there also to be shifting to that fuel source for the freight industry. One of the other ones that's currently in legislation proposal is the rail safety bill. That's looking to try to shorten length of trains and multiple things on the train system. Some of the concerns from the rails is having to shorten trains actually increases the number of trains that have to then run. So it reduces the efficiency and doesn't necessarily reach the goals that the legislation is being proposed. There's concern that some of those may actually increase cost and possibly the impacts to the trying to get passenger rail along the Front Range, which would use the freight rail lines also for that. There's concerns that it may be increasing the conflicts of having more freight trains when you're trying to also add passenger rail. So it's something that, again, legislative intent is not necessarily reaching the goals of everybody that's involved. So things that are moving forward with that. Otherwise, not a lot else new. Good rain this last week, so.
Okay, Grand Valley.
All right, thank you. And our apologies for not being able to be there today. We've had a busy couple of months. We're now under contract for our 2050 regional transportation plan, and that will be done by with BHI and supported by Cambridge Systematics for our greenhouse gas and freight parts of that. We are also making good progress on our Mesa County Safety Action Plan, and we've generally completed the data analysis, and we've also completed our first virtual open house and survey. We are planning to go under contract for the construction of our fleet maintenance facility for our Grand Valley Transit in the next couple of weeks, and hoping to break ground on June 5th for that facility. So that's really exciting. And then we did have a board meeting a couple weeks ago, and the board adopted our 2025-2028 TIP, and also did a TIP amendment number 5 for our 2024-27 TIP. So I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Gunnison Valley. Well, I think you had my report in terms of the bridge on Highway 50 over Blue Mesa Reservoir. One of the other things I want to mention is the fact that we got our TPR meeting is happening next week, the 9th of May. And so we'll be moving on with beginning some planning information anyway, and we'll have a presentation, small presentation on planning and what that means as it's coming up for the next year or so. The thing of it is we're heading into a new planning process. I'm not sure what the headquarters has got worked up for us yet. Last couple of years, when we did the long range plan, it worked out very well. It was a lot of work, but it worked out very well, and CDOT got a lot of information from the county meetings that they attended, and they attended all of them. So anyway, that's my report. Let's see, Intermountain, should I say Intermountain number 1? Just a quick comment on 1101. The commission is going to be reviewing that in 2 weeks at the regular meeting. Possibility for a decision then, if not in June. So we'll have to see. There'll be important meeting next time. I can't remember. It's the 15th and 16th of this month. Okay, North Front Range.
Thank you. I'm John Mallow, Chair of the North Front Range, sitting in for Johnny Olson. So the meeting's going to go a lot shorter, Vince, just so
Yeah,
you know that.
yeah.
Yeah. In March, we had a meeting and we had a status report on our TDM as well as our region's first TMO. That'll be between Loveland and Loveland area and Greeley. And we hope to we have invited Estes Park, and we hope they join us. That'd be fantastic. In the April meeting, we had a presentation on the Northern Colorado Airport, which is jointly managed by the cities of Fort Collins and Loveland. And for the record, it is actually in Loveland, in case you don't know that. And last but not least, the lady to my right, Suzette Mallett, is going to be retiring in August. For real, we talked her out of it at least a couple times. So we're in a search process, so I'm pretty sure it's going to take place. So as we get closer to August, we'll have some festivities, stuff like that. So thank you.
Thank you. Northwest.
So we had a meeting April 11th. We discussed quite a lot. We started having a conversation about our bylaws and mostly around our transit vote. We are literally a special snowflake in the sense that we have a heavily weighted county with a lot of municipalities in it. And then the other 4 counties have very few. So our weighting system is on a kind of bizarre scale compared to you all. So trying to integrate a transit vote to how we vote is very interesting to try to find that new transit vote and how they're going to be included. So the conversations will continue around that. Vice Chair Brian Cirkvenick and I are really wrestling with that one and trying to get something out to our constituents. We also had a discussion around the bylaws, and we really don't feel as though we're going to do a lot with them. We're just going to do an addendum for that transit vote and clean up to try to make the chair and vice chair positions the longer positions so we don't have this continuous revolving door. As far as what's happening in Northwest Colorado, yes, it did snow yesterday, shockingly enough. Winter Park and Steamboat continue to have their competition on who has the most snow, and shockingly enough, Steamboat won again with almost 400 inches this year. Again, we are still in talks about the Northwest Rail. That is going to be in parallel with the TPR. So the TPR doesn't have much to do with it, but it will probably literally ram right through our TPR one day or another once we actually have something to talk about more than just consultant picking at this point. Wildlife corridors and passing lanes are our #1 priorities up in the Northwest until and unless we have a resiliency issue of US 40 being the only corridor that works. Red Dirt Hill on the east side is going to, phase 1 is going to start working. We're going to do that. The 40 overlay over Tabernash. State Highway 64 west of Meeker Bridges will finish up. Downtown 40 is having a concrete panel replacement that's occurring currently right now till June 21st. And then there's a Hamilton South on 13 to 317. And Downhill Drive signal is going to be done this year on US 40. Winter Park wants to give a huge thanks for all the patching and the work done on the pave last year, and the fact that the pavement is going to start happening on their side this year, which is huge. Let's see. We are in the talks with, what is it? Moffett, Craig, Hayden, Steamboat, and Route is in the early discussions of an RTA. There may be a vote this November on forming that. It would be, I believe at this point, Steamboat and Route that would hold that vote. But the other individual municipalities and counties are still at the table to discuss an RTA and what that looks like for long-term planning. Our Steamboat's Transit Authority had a very successful winter with over 750,000 passengers for the year. That's a lot of people in a town of 13,000, just so you guys get that. Our next meeting is July 25th, and I'm happy to say that we have a website. Thanks to this wonderful HB 1101, you can go on to nwtpr.org and check us out. We stole some little tidbits from all your websites, so we look like we're normal and official. And it's been really nice to be able to direct people to that, to say, here's your priority project list. Here's how this works. Here's what we're prioritizing as our corridor. So I'm not getting a lot of random emails. I can just shove them to the email or to the website now. And it does, and it has been a very great education process for new electeds and people coming into the TPR that want to understand more of how their project could be prioritized when we have a list of over 130 projects up in the Northwest Corridor. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Brian, do you have anything? He's on the phone.
I'm about 30 minutes away, guys. No, nothing else to add. I really would echo what Winter Park said about the potholes. So thanks for that. See you guys shortly.
Thanks. Pikes Peak.
Okay, yes, so we did go over the Pikes Peak Area Council of Government bylaws. We have updated those. They were approved last month. We are continuing on with our MAMSIP I-25 construction. That's getting closer and closer every day to being done. And Fillmore to Garden of the Gods reconstruction is working very well. Still going into a funnel every day, but people are getting used to it. We have some pedestrian improvements going on Highway 24. And we are getting ready for a big project that we're going to have to consider at our next meeting next week. State Highway 21, which is Powers Boulevard. In our region, we have always done our best to prioritize the military access over any other project. And so this is Powers and Airport Interchange, which is the West Gate to Peterson Air Force Base. Huge asset for us. We have the East Gate to Peterson Air Force Base in really good shape, as well as the North Gates finishing up some work on it. And so this one, we did a bid opening. Shane was updating me this morning, bid opening on April 11th. And we had 2 bids. They were a little high, which is going to upset the mayor of Calhan, who just got actually defeated. So the new mayor of Calhan is going to get to accept credit for this, because we're probably going to have to move money from a project on US 24 going east to Calhan so that we can get the Powers and Airport Interchange going and get that completed. That was also a congressionally directed funding request through one of our senators' offices. So that's one of our really important ones. And I think that is what we're doing. We have a meeting next Wednesday, and we'll just keep working on projects. We're looking forward to the summer. We do have, we love the winter months. About starting in March, the potholes do multiply and replenish. Since my kids aren't doing that great of job of providing me grandkids, something has to. So I just wanted to provide a little joke there.
Okay, Pueblo area.
So we met last week, and we got a really great update from Pueblo Transit. They're getting ready to launch 2 new transit routes. This is to provide users with direct shopping routes, which will be really great. It'll reduce the headway from 30 to 45 minutes to about 5 to 15 minutes, which will be amazing for the north part of our community and also the south part of our community. This past Tuesday, we had a ribbon cutting for exit 104. It was great to see that open. They should be awarding the Medal of Honor, which is the connection going from west to east. It's used to be called the Joe Martinez extension, but they've renamed it to the Medal of Honor, and they should be awarding that project shortly. let's see, we're in the middle of updating our tip and hopefully this month we'll get that adopted and completing our TDM with our consultant. And the county and city are working together to put a really great proposal together for the ATIP funding. And of course, the county did receive $1 million in the congressional discretionary funds, and they're excited about that. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks. San Luis Valley.
Yeah, good morning again, everybody. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. Scheduled projects are getting started, and as a TPR, we're working on our bylaws and IGAs to get that stuff in order, and we're looking forward to our CDOT county meetings. Our next TPR meeting is May 23rd. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. South Central.
Good morning, Luis Lopez, Los Angeles County Commissioner. I'm here for a couple reasons this morning. Commissioner John Galusha had a knee replacement, so let's all keep him in our thoughts and prayers. He asked me to be here on his behalf today, and also to introduce to you Mr. Brian Blasey, who is now our Executive Director for South Central Council of Governments, will be our voice for the Huérfano Los Angeles County region. And after I'm done with my little spill here, I'll turn it over to him for the local updates with Shane as well. A couple reasons I'd like to discuss with our Intermountain community as well. With our last TPR was last Thursday in communications with Terry Hart for the boundary issue. There might be a solution to this issue instead of doing the boundaries at this point. Commissioner Hart and I have been discussing this, possibly introducing legislation next year to add to the TPRs instead of redistricting and changing the boundaries. I truly believe that everyone needs a voice, including our mountain communities, and separating and pulling apart is just going to restrict all of our regions from having that voice. So that's being considered. I'll be up here on the 16th for that meeting to make public comment regarding that concern for the boundaries of that. The Moffett Tunnel is a concern of mine that was mentioned earlier by a few of you folks as the Front Range Passenger Rail treasurer. We are having difficulties getting some hard numbers from our rail friends from the UP and BNSF. I think, and John Putman and I just spoke recently, a few minutes ago through text regarding how we can move forward with this. The hard numbers that we need from Front Range Rail is kind of, I think, at a standstill because of this negotiations for the Moffett Tunnel. The sooner that could be concluded, I think Front Range Rail can move forward. We are still in the process of determining whether a ballot measure will come forward here to the state now in 24, or we'll have a go, no go here soon. So those are the issues that I have with the Moffett Tunnel and the boundaries for our TPRs. I really think that these issues could be resolved through legislation for the boundaries especially. And then the sooner the better for CDOT to get that negotiation done for the Moffett Tunnel will assist Front Range Rail. And hopefully we can all have up and down the I-25 corridor sooner than later passenger rail. So with that being said, I thank you for your time. And for all of you that here at CDOT and do what you guys do for all of our communities up and down the entire state of Colorado. And with that, Mr. Blasey.
Good morning. So our TPR met April 25th, which was last Thursday. We discussed project updates, with our largest project being the Walsenburg Bridge replacement. And the first set of girders are being installed on that, and they expect to be completed by the end of our late 2024 with the bridge complete. And that's just our largest project, and we have a lot of small projects going on. So.
Thank you. Southeast.
Okay, thank you. Our TPR met April 24th. We reviewed and passed our bylaws and the IGA document for the RPC that will be distributed to the 31 member governments for signature. We're working on our website. We're very close. Pretty excited to be able to share that information across the region for access to all the documents that they need for the TPR and public comment. The Southeast has been super busy. Over the past 2 years, we've completed a build of 83 doors of housing. And with that, we're also now continuing another build of 34 doors. So transit and mobility has been a real big focus for us to go along with that as an amenity. We launched the Southeast Transit that is now running. It originates in Benton County at Los Animas and runs 2 directions, east and west, connecting us to existing local transit, so La Junta Transit, Prowers Area Transit. The west route runs over to Rocky Ford and back to Los Animas, hitting La Junta along the way, as well as the east traveling over to Lamar, which connects with Prowers Area Transit. In the first 2 weeks of operation, we've had 32 riders. So we're really excited to be able to make those connections, and we're really doing train the rider events and helping them to familiarize themselves with access. With that, we also created a new software platform. It is a rider app, which also connects both transits. Prowers Area Transit was our guinea pig. They were very willing to get the app out for us, work out all the bugs, and now we can actually plan our rides. If you look on the app, you can actually plan. It's an Uber for rural transit, and it's wonderful. It's working well. We're having conversations with trying to maybe connect with Bustang on that so that, you know, we can actually move our people across even all the way up to Colorado Springs. So we're pretty excited about that. C-Tran is now on that app, as well as Prowers Area Transit, and we have others that are going to be joining soon. As far as projects go, we had State Highway 385, the realignment and new structure north of Grenada. That is nearly completed, much needed. It is a better access on the highway as far as moving people right through there. We've had a bridge bundle project. 5 of the 9 structures are substantially complete, and we have 4 others that are in the progress right now. And a timber bridge retrofit. So they've added sister beams to freight and non-freight corridor timber bridges in various locations, and that is in construction or getting ready to start. Other than that, we were awarded the Thriving Communities Grant for $2 million in the region. So we're very excited about that for adding capacity for grant writing and accessing CDOT related grants. So all in all, we've been very busy, and we're excited to have opportunities. And again, along with South Central, we're really asking for the consideration to continue to allow us to operate as we are now. I think we're individuals, and we have very different needs, and we're hoping for that consideration whenever the TC makes that decision. So, thank you.
Okay. Southwest.
Just pass the mic here. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Hill. I'm actually your alternate STAC rep after our recent elections a couple months ago, but your STAC representative Heather Alvarez from the town of Mancos had prior engagement today, so I'm happy to step in for her. But at our April meeting, we also introduced the discussion of the long-range plan. We're going to be bringing our projects in August to start that ranking process. And we're also going to be queuing up our projects for the multimodal options funding. And I just wanted to put a quick plug in for how important that flexibility of the local MMOF funding is for rural agencies. A cutaway bus that I purchased in 2022, the exact same model, was $82,000 in 2022. It's $186,000 now. So it's really nice to have that additional option for rurals where there's not a lot of transit funding flexibility. We also passed bylaw amendments that gave a vote to our chair and our Region 5 director. And then the big exciting news is we've got a ribbon cutting plan for next week for our 550-160 connection. And it's about a $98.6 million project. There's been a lot of focus on it. It's going to be realigning 550 and 160 through the Grandview interchange. So we're all excited to walk across the bridge deck before they send cars across. And also locals are excited that it's going to free up some of the contractors that have been dedicated in our region. We had a pretty straightforward multimodal capital project that just received a construction bid with $800,000 in mobilization costs because all of our subcontractors are coming from out of town. So anyway, that's our update. Good to see everybody.
Okay, Upper Front Range, Elizabeth.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Vince. Commissioner Becker's online, but I'll be giving the update for Upper Front Range this morning. We did have our last meeting on March 7th, and as always, CDOT staff has been great in supporting us with our agendas. Commissioner Becker was able to talk about the infra grant that they had received for Morgan County for I-76 Phase 4 award for $29.1 million. And we appreciate CDOT for helping Morgan County manage that. It's going to be a great project and we're excited for them. Also, CDOT gave a presentation on US 287. Obviously, some of you may be aware of some of the fatalities that have occurred along 287 between Wyoming and Colorado. And so CDOT has taken the initiative and been very proactive with looking at alternatives that could be implemented along that corridor. And now we're just trying to find some funding, I think, to figure out how to get some of those projects implemented as soon as possible. So appreciate CDOT and all their help with making that a priority, as well as Colorado 14, looking at a safety study along that corridor as well. This is a high freight movement corridor between Larimer, pretty much Weld and Morgan. And looking at the safety improvements again that we're seeing with the increased traffic on Highway 14, which also gets blocked by trains for long periods of time, which is always fun for a state highway. And speaking of trains, I'm super excited to speak about our ribbon cutting that CDOT is having on US 85. This is our Peckham interchange at County Road 44. When I first came to Weld County in 2009, this intersection was the worst crash intersection along US 85. And in working with CDOT and Union Pacific Railroad, it's taken 12 years to get to an agreement where we could do rail improvements, close roads, and create a grade separation. And so just a shout out to Heather and her team with that partnership and finally seeing this interchange become a reality that we get to celebrate on May 9th. So you are all welcome to come to Weld County at 1:30 in the afternoon and join us for this ribbon cutting that we're very excited about and very grateful for. Speaking of, since I'm already now talking about how old I am, I got to be a part of the hiring committee for Suzette. And so we have had the privilege of working together for more than 25 years. And in case you're not sure then how old that makes me, I'm the same age as the Eisenhower Johnson Tunnel. There you go. But it's just been a privilege to work with Suzette for all of these years. She's been a great asset for the North Front Range and for all of us in transportation. And so I don't think anybody's going to miss you more than me. With that, I also want to thank DRCOG for all of their help and the Transportation Commission and everybody for the I-76 Weld County Road 8 1601 interchange, amending your transportation plans to help with this project. Weld County is going to apply for a rural surface transportation application in this next round of MPDG. And so hopefully we can be successful in partnership with CDOT and BNSF with relocating their intermodal rail facility out of the metro area into northern Colorado. The last thing we did at Upper Front Range 2 is award our congestion mitigation and air quality funds for fiscal year 23 to Estes Park for their project. So Upper Front Range is unusual as a TPR who's been in the non-attainment boundary for a lot of years, where we get to award projects to communities in the for our CMAQ funding. And so this year it's going to go to Estes Park. And then we memorialized our MOA for our 4P funding schedule for fiscal years 25 to 28. And so that's gone through the process, and always appreciate CDOT coming then and giving a presentation on recapping the 2023 4P meetings. They did a great job of letting us know all the feedback they received from just the general public and the communities on transportation issues and concerns, so that we can start getting prepared for our next plan update. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks. Okay, Southern Ute. Okay, Ute Mountain.
Hello, yeah, this is Brendan Adams. I'm the transportation specialist with Ute Mountain Tribe. Just want to start by saying, to say thank you to CDOT for all the work that they're doing for the tribe here. They're doing a lot here. One thing that we just received was a certificate of completion, for lack of a better term. I'm not sure what it's called for sure, but we did receive this completion notice that on the bridge, Aztec Creek Bridge, that area, that region on 160. And then they're also working on near the bridge that crosses over San Juan River, which is also near the Four Corners Monument. So there's a lot of work they're doing for us on that Highway 160 corridor. And then also they are getting ready to install some signs for us. They're cattle signs and horse signs, roughly 10, 12 signs altogether. Throughout the highways here for the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. We have a lot of ranchers and people that own cattle and horses throughout this whole region here for us. And then lastly, we've our main intersection on Highway 160 and our road, which is called Mike Wash Road, which is our main intersection for our small community here. We seem to have issues there every year. CDOT's helping us with some alternative plans right now to help the situation as far as traffic in that region. And then also our chairman is going to the senators in the state to see if they can get any congressional district funding to put in a traffic light there. So there's those things that are happening right now. There's other things, smaller things, but CDOT's really the main key in helping the tribe here with our roads in this region. So we appreciate them for all the work they do. And that's about it. I've got to bow out now. I've got a meeting coming up here at 10. So thank you guys.
Thanks, Brendan. FHWA, Bill.
Thanks, Vince. Bill Haas with Federal Highway Administration. A couple things real quick. Since we're now in May, we recalculate the inactive rate. Essentially, those are projects using federal aid funds that are inactive, meaning that they are under contract, but they have not submitted an invoice for reimbursement within the last 12 months. So we recalculate that at the beginning of the month. We bumped up a little bit. We are at currently 3%. The CDOT goal for inactives is 1%. The FHWA goal is 2%. So it can, sometimes one or two projects can kind of make that big difference. The inactive rate has come down significantly. It was upwards of 13% earlier, like late last calendar year. There's one CMAQ project in particular that we're trying to get the bill processed. Our understanding it's internal at CDOT. So hopefully we can get that addressed and we'll get that rate down again. This year, big focus for our division office here on delivering these discretionary grants that we have, in particular with direct recipients. We have upwards of over 90 active, or shouldn't say all active, but 90 discretionary grants. That's a combination of direct recipients, CDOT sponsored grants. So it's a lot and we keep getting more. I do want to mention the SS4A planning grants. We have several of those from FY22 that we had executed grant agreements about a year ago. And guess what? Many of them are going to be triggered to go into inactive. Those are not part of this 3% that I just mentioned. And that's a whole separate thing. So whatever we can do to kind of get those projects moving along, some of those really are inactive because they haven't really started yet. They haven't at least submitted any invoices. I will mention in March, we did a virtual peer exchange with all of the SS4A FY 22 and 23 grant recipients to kind of go through the process, the invoicing process. We understand and readily admit it's not the easiest thing to do. It's a bit complicated, but we want to be as helpful as possible. So I anticipate we'll probably do another one of these peer exchanges sometime later this year. Essentially, some of the FY 23 grants don't really know what questions to ask yet. So we'll give them a little bit of time to formulate that. The last thing is that it was mentioned the congressionally designated spending or earmarks, kind of asking for some funding potentially, but we have heard, this was a couple days ago, that for the 2024 cycle, that at least the Senate side, they have a list. Will be asked soon, the next week or so, to kind of do what we call a red flag review to see what we know about the project. There's a few questions to ask. So essentially, we are in that cycle right now. We expect probably on the House side that we'll get a list fairly soon. So, and we just had that notice in April, I think it was, as far as the projects that we did get selected for the that particular, I think, for FY 23. That's it.
Thank you. FTA.
Good morning.
Emma.
Hi, I'm Belmont with FTA. I don't have any updates to share at this moment. But I'm here if anyone has questions, and please feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you want to discuss anything not in front of the whole group.
Okay, thanks, Emma.
Thank you.
Okay, legislative report. Emily and Jamie.
Hi all. I'm right here. Jamie's right here. Emily won't be able to join us. She hopped on at 9:30 and then got pulled away and had to join, had to do some legislative work. So she is going to send an update to everyone tomorrow. And hopefully everybody's getting the weekly legislative reports. If you have any specific questions for her, just let me know and I'll follow up with her. So Jamie Grimm here with OPGR. This is my first day with a name tag. I'm very excited about this. I belong. So my silly thing at the beginning of my presentation, May is bike month. So on Sunday, it is National Ride a Bike Day. I don't think they care where you go or what you do, just ride a bike. So I hope the weather is good and everyone can celebrate that on Friday. Some bike trivia. So bikes were invented in 1817, but did not have pedals until the 1860s, which I don't know, seems unproductive, but the first manufactured bike that was available was nicknamed the Bone Shaker, which the description is in the title, and it weighed 176 pounds, and it was available in 1867. There are twice as many bikes in the world as there are cars, which I don't know is too surprising. The longest tandem bike that was ever created seated 35 people. I don't know. I didn't look up how far they went though. The longest wheelie on a bike was 339 miles, which sounds uncomfortable, but over 100 million bikes are manufactured every year. And bike helmets weren't introduced until the 1970s, which is just wild to me that it took 100 years for someone to figure that out. So actual information that will, help people in their real lives. Congressional update. There is a lot going on in Congress, but not much related to transportation. The biggest thing right now is the FAA reauthorization is hopefully finally moving through. I think everybody's pretty optimistic that they'll finally be able to get the 5-year deal. It's been punted 3 different times. It expires on May 10th. So this is the last big piece of legislation, must pass legislation before the next fiscal year, which ends in September, and it's also an election year, which I'm sure no one knew about. So 5-year bill, 105 billion for the FAA, 738 million for the NSTB, the National Safety Transportation Board. Some of the things that are included in the bill that was introduced on Monday, granted there's been some arguing. So it codifies the refunds for travelers that DOT announced a couple weeks ago. If your flight is delayed over 3 hours for a domestic flight and over 6 hours for an international flight, you get an automatic refund. It provides funding for more air traffic controllers. It'll improve runway safety. And by that, they mean there's just a lot more money for runway safety funding. And it makes tweaks to the airport grants that are available. And the Division of Aeronautics is very happy to see that. Just a reminder in Colorado, CDOT doesn't have, none of the airport money goes through us. It goes directly to airports. Our Division of Aeronautics provides grants and helps airports, accomplish things and stay in the know about what's going on. But the aeronautical money that comes to us goes directly to the Division of Aeronautics and then goes through to airports. In the House next week, there is a vote to remove Speaker Johnson. It probably won't pass, but we might have another speaker debate. So we'll see. Hopefully that doesn't happen. To Bill's point, earmarks were due in the House this week. So a lot of you probably had to get CDOT letters, things like that. If you still need your CDOT letter confirming that we will put your project in the STIP, please let me know. I'm the one coordinating that. And then just to end, I want to wish everybody an International Scurvy Awareness Day. Take a baby to lunch day, as well as International Brother and Sister Day. So if you have a sibling, let them know that you appreciate them. So, and eat an orange. Yeah.
Okay, Holly.
I do have a question, but Jamie, since you're federal, I don't know if it'd be for you. But I was really concerned about House Bill 1313 in the Colorado State Legislature, and I would ask Vince that you take it in front of the Transportation Committee. I know Commissioner Adams is here today. This one only applies to cities if they're in metropolitan planning organizations, have a population over 4,000 and have more than 75 acres of transit areas. But there's 30 jurisdictions that qualify under it. And if we don't meet the density requirements in this bill for housing, if we don't meet the housing opportunity goals is what it's called, then the state can withhold our highway user tax funding. That's a big concern to me because many years when the recession, especially before we had our RTA, and we didn't have any other funding. There were many years when we had a recession and the highway user tax fund was all we had, especially for El Paso County. The city of Colorado Springs struggled as well before we got our pothole tax to resolve that. But it's just one of those issues I was very concerned about. Now, it doesn't say CDOT supporting it, but it has been introduced by the governor. And the governor's been pushing it. So I appreciate CDOT somewhat staying neutral on that. But with the session ending soon, hopefully it won't get out of appropriations. But if it does, I have real concerns about it. So thank you.
Okay, so House Bill 1313.
House Bill 1313.
Okay, go ahead. Suzette.
Yeah, so this is also a follow-up for Emily. The two new bills that just dropped in, and I may have these numbers wrong, but I think it's Senate Bill 229 and 230, the great agreement between the oil and gas industry to help, and the other pieces to help fund Front Range passenger rail. It's just recently dropped, and so it came out on the 30th, so any information would be great.
Yeah, I'll ask her to include that when she sends out her update, and I'll ask her to include the question about the HUTF. No, you can't ask questions.
Go ahead, Ron.
Hi, Jamie. I just, if the chair doesn't mind, I maybe can shed a little bit of light on the question about 1313. An amendment has been approved in committee on the Senate side to take the HUTF and the injunction piece for enforcement out of the bill. My understanding is there are still some conversations going on in the Senate, and there's at least a senator that would like to put that back into the bill. So I don't know what's going to happen, but as it stands right now, that provision's been amended out of the bill in committee on the Senate side. So we'll see what happens with it. On Senate Bill 230, just based on a quick read of it yesterday, the new fee that would be applied to the oil and gas industry, I forget, I think the estimate is it would raise something on the order of like $150-ish million a year initially. 70% of the revenue would go to most of the revenue would go to the Clean Transit Enterprise that was created in Senate Bill 260. 70% of that money would be distributed to transit agencies under some formula the enterprise would have to develop for transit operations. 20% of the revenue would go to supporting the Front Range passenger rail development, and 10% for competitive grant programs for transit agencies and other eligible entities. I think that's our quick read of the bill as we understand it, as it was introduced yesterday.
Can I ask Ron, do you know if the funding, if the oil and gas fees are going to go statewide or to the directly impacted communities?
I think the fees assessed statewide and then goes to the Clean Transit Enterprise.
Okay, any other questions? Well, we're a little bit behind, but not that much. So let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:20.
Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. If everyone could take their seats so the chair can call the meeting to order.
Okay, so I hope everybody had a chance to visit the donut and fruit bar over there. So anyway, next item on the agenda is our 2050 statewide plan overview. Marissa.
I'll kick it off if you don't mind, Chair. Thank you all for joining us in person, knowing that we want to start the conversation on the next planning cycle. And today's presentation by Marissa and a couple of others, including Chris LaPlante from the Air and Climate section here at DTD and Marcia Nelson from the Environmental Justice branch here at CDOT. We'll talk about some of the logistical pieces, timelines, and other items such as requirements, what's required from the Fed side, what's required from state statute and our rules, knowing that there still are some decisions to be made with, at the TC this month that was alluded to a little bit earlier. So looking forward to healthy discussion on a couple of these items, and we'll talk about next steps towards the end of the presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Marissa, who's going to kick us off.
All right, thanks, Darius. Let's see if this works. Okay. So starting with the required elements, we thought we would start here. This slide provides a very high-level overview of the key state and federal requirements that we need to plan for when we develop a long-range plan. So the next long-range plan that we'll be developing will be our 2050 plan. It'll be supported by our 2050 regional transportation plans that are developed for each of the 15 transportation planning regions. And I think these are really helpful to be keeping top of mind as we go through the rest of the presentation, because this is what we're truly trying to plan for and do when we create our next long range plan. So the very first bullet there is performance-based. So we'll be talking about PD 14, our policy that guides the goals and objectives of our statewide plan. So that really hits that performance-based bullet. The second bullet is identify reasonably expected financial resources. That gets to our program distribution conversations, which it's made up of long-range revenue projections. And then we spent a lot of last year talking about the formula programs. Next, we have to look at environmental mitigation. We have to address 10 federal planning factors. Those are listed in the box to the right. Have a minimum of a 20-year time horizon, integration and consistency with relevant plans, including the regional transportation plans and many other plans, early and continuous public involvement, and then of course to seek out and consider needs so equity consideration and looking at traditionally underserved communities. Okay, so with that all in mind, we are beginning to scope out the next long-range plan, and we are still in the very early stages of doing so. So today, we'll share with you sort of what we know and what we're going to need to work through to get to sort of where we need to go at the end of this process. So starting, like I said before, we will first be looking to update our policy directive 14, updating what our performance measures, our targets and goals are for the next long-range plan, long-range revenue projections, and then last but not least, we need to know have a final decision made on the transportation planning region boundaries, so we know who we're working with.
Marissa, if I could add on to this before we get into the specifics, looking at TC in May and what we'll be talking about with this group at the June meeting is Policy Directive 14 and the long-range revenue projections. There will be an initial presentation that will have some of the similar slides here, but we'll have this initial presentation on those what we have found out from those recommendations. Policy Directive 14 from my group, and the revenue projections from the Division of Accounting and Finance, of course, and the recommendations for program distribution as well. So those will be presented at the TC next month with a potential approval in June if the TC is satisfied with the staff recommendations on there. So I wanted to give this group a heads up on some of the stuff that is going to be coming. And of course, we will bring those items to you at the June meeting for discussion and potential recommendation as well. One final note on the program distribution piece. Most of the programs, we have a decision in June penciled in. However, MMOF, because of certain things regarding the previous resolution, which authorized the distribution formulas, we want to get that done this month with the recommendation that was passed from presenting the recommendation and getting it done this month. So that way those formulas can be distributed out and you can have your totals for project selection. So, and there is some other match requirements as well. So that will be done in one resolution. So that's what's coming forward on here, and that will supplement this presentation and will help with a lot of the conversations that will go forward throughout the summer and until the end of this process late next year. So go ahead, Marissa.
Darius. So I think you've seen this slide before, but just just to reiterate, updating PD 14 is one of the very first steps of the planning process, and will help us to ensure that our investment decisions are aligned to support our strategic decision-making and performance measures. Updating PD 14 is going to be especially critical to help us with the next prioritization of projects for the 10-year plan. It will help MPOs and TPRs to review and analyze the needs of projects in their areas and just, ensure overall transparency in prioritizing limited funding statewide. I think we don't plan because we have easy decisions to make. We have to make some really hard decisions. And so updating PD 14 will help us to be transparent and help us to make those difficult decisions that will come ahead. Let's see, the next part of it is, and I think, like Darius said, PD 14 will come back to STAC next month. Commission will be starting the conversations this month. Come back to STAC next month for some recommendations to the commission on that. Sort of in unison with that, we will be looking at the long-range revenue projections. So Jeff Sinmeyer will come to STAC next month as well to share with you his progress in updating the long-range revenue forecasts and assumptions. This will help us to determine how much revenue is anticipated out to 2050 and help us to get some planning control totals to guide the next 10-year plan update. So, I think PD 14 and long-range revenue projections, they go hand in hand. PD 14 guides our long-term goals with ambitious but achievable performance targets for improvement. And then and that is paired with how much funding we can reasonably expect in over the long term out to 2050. And then, of course, we will have hopefully soon a decision on what the TPR boundaries will be. So that will allow us to start working with the TPRs once we know exactly what they'll be. So some other next steps and something that I strive to do better for each planning process is we try to have a very integrated statewide plan. So, when I think of integrated planning, I think of a cross-functional process that helps us set strategic priorities and better coordinate the use of time and resources. It ensures that our investment decisions are aligned to support that strategic decision-making and performance measures. It ensures the data that we have is available and aligned across different planning groups and areas. And really, without integrated planning, planning activities can become fragmented, and this can result in confusion about what our priorities are and what we're going to do with our limited resources. So some of the things that we really want to be very thoughtful about how we integrate within the scope of the statewide plan include greenhouse mitigation, and we'll have Chris LaPlante talk about that next. Another key area will be transit and rail. I believe Kay is here to give a little bit of information on how we're thinking of integrating transit and rail through a transit connection study that is being conducted. Safety, huge key area for integration, active transportation, freight, asset management. Heard a lot about resiliency today. These are just some highlights. My team has a huge list of modal, functional area, and topical area plans. There's over 25 of them in total that we will be working to integrate into the scope of the statewide plan. So I'm going to turn it to Chris now to talk about greenhouse gas.
Thanks, Marissa. Morning, everyone. Chris LaPlante with the Air and Climate section of the Division of Transportation Development. I just wanted to take a moment to go through a couple slides with you to talk about the greenhouse gas planning rule. Hopefully a reminder for many, but since it is integral in our planning process, wanted to provide you another quick overview of this rule. So in 2021, the Transportation Commission adopted the Transportation Planning Rule to address greenhouse gas reduction requirements, and it requires both the MPOs and CDOT to account and demonstrate reductions in greenhouse gases through the long-range planning effort. So, really one of the primary goals of the rule is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector through the development and consideration during the long-range planning process by supporting more travel choices. So again, as just kind of a quick overview here, the rule itself establishes for the 5 MPO geographic areas as well as for CDOT, which is all the geographic regions outside the MPO areas, specific targets for greenhouse gas reductions. And these essentially have to be analyzed each time either CDOT or the MPOs are updating and adopting a new long-range plan. So there are different horizon lines. I'm not going to go into deep detail on this table, but essentially for CDOT in the context of this conversation, we have specific requirements again to demonstrate reductions over time through our project selection and our long-range planning process. This is just the simple graphic of many of you, I'm sure, understand where our MPOs are. Again, for CDOT's planning process now, we are in charge of emissions that are resulting in the gray area on this graph. And so again, tying this back to the last slide, essentially CDOT has to demonstrate greenhouse gas reductions within the gray area on this image. And so obviously that's covering a lot of our rural areas. So how does the process work? This is a really quick overview, but essentially it works through a couple elements. So for CDOT, and I'm going to focus on CDOT today, but this applies to the MPOs. So CDOT, essentially, this is a modeling exercise. We use our travel demand models to essentially look at the infrastructure and develop our estimates of BMT and congestions and speeds. That is coupled together then with EPA's MOVES model, which is a model that estimates the emissions that are coming from different fleet mixes in terms of passenger vehicles, heavy duty vehicles. So that's estimating the amount of emissions that are occurring per vehicle mile traveled. And then with those two models coupled together, we can estimate total greenhouse gas emissions on a mass basis. And so the way the rule works itself is that essentially both the MPOs and CDOT have to model the greenhouse gas emissions that they are part of the last long-range plan that had been adopted as of January 30th, 2022, and that sets the baseline. And then the reduction levels in the table are what have to be achieved from that baseline plan. So it's essentially saying we plan this as in our long range plan that had been adopted by January 30th, 2022. And then as we move forward into the future, each time we're updating our long-range plan, we have to do this modeling exercise, what we would call the compliance demonstration, and demonstrate that based on our project selection and our long-range plan, that we will achieve those levels of a reduction at the various horizon lines in the rule, in the table that I shared with you all. So we are in that process now, as Marissa indicated. We are, really going to need to be, this is important to consider because this is really one of the constraints in the planning process, is that CDOT will have to demonstrate compliance with those emission reductions as we go through this planning process. And so this is really just more a graphic of what I've just shared with you about how this process works. I'll focus on the last step here. Essentially, when we go through the modeling process, if we're able to demonstrate compliance with those reduction levels out into the future based on the project selection in CDOT's 10-year plan, then essentially we have demonstrated compliance, and that would go in front of our Transportation Commission for acceptance by resolution. There are alternatives if we're not able to use the modeling exercise to demonstrate that we've achieved the reductions. There is a process to establish alternative mitigation measures, essentially, that we have a policy directive, PD 1610, that outlines how both CDOT and the MPOs could utilize some what we might call off-model mitigation measures, different types of smaller projects that are not easy to characterize in the travel demand model, to also cover that gap that might exist between what we were able to do in the transportation model and then still achieve additional greenhouse gas reductions outside that modeling exercise. So with that, just moving on to my last slide, again, just in summary, CDOT's going to need to demonstrate compliance with specific reduction levels through what we've selected in our 10-year plan. We are in charge of the geographic region outside the MPO areas, and so that's where our analysis is focused in terms of the reductions that we're seeking to achieve and the change in the behavior of transportation in those regions. And it really emphasizes the need for our multimodal infrastructure projects that enhance transit and active transportation is really an important consideration in our project selection. So with that, I will turn it over to Darius.
So with apologies to my friends from the MPOs, I think one of the things to kind of take away from this is previously we had done this exercise where we had to take out things from previous plans that were already in place because this rule came into effect essentially in 2 years after the adoption of the 10-year plan, and then in the middle of the planning cycle, I believe, for North Front Range of Dr. Cog, but you can correct me on that if that wasn't correct. So, but this gives us an opportunity to start fresh and take a look at that mix of projects and really provide transportation choice. So we wanted to be transparent with the process on how everything is done. This is all in the planning standard rule. I think it's 2 CCR 601-22 if you want to take a look at the entire cycle if you so wish to. But the important thing to consider from this presentation is taking a look. We do have emission targets that we need to get. What mix of projects will allow us to get there? And that this is one piece of the overall greenhouse gas roadmap that affects transportation as well. So planning, electrification, providing modal choice all goes into developing, meeting the goals that were set by the legislature back in 2019. So I'll turn it back over to you, Marissa.
Thanks, Darius. Can I have the?
Go ahead. Who did? So, Dana.
All right, sorry, lost my mouse. I raised my hand early on, but I was just wanted to know, as far as the funding distribution for, this is not really related to the long range plan, but will the CPG funding be taken also to the TC in June?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the recommendation will be taken into June, and also the FHWA has to approve anything that comes forward on there because that's the requirement for SPR funding. So we will know in June whether the TC approves the recommendation, and we should have a decision from FHWA shortly thereafter.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. And your last bullet here is an excellent segue to our next slide, which is about transit and rail planning area integration. And Kay, would you be willing to talk a little bit about the transit connection study in the slide?
Yeah, happy to. So in the fall, the Transportation Commission approved some funding from their program reserve to accelerate a couple elements of transit and rail planning within my team. One component of that is the transit connection study. Vince did recap this as part of his TC report earlier, but just so that everyone's aware, the transit connection study is really looking at developing that strategic statewide vision for transit in Colorado. How do we make sure that all these systems are connecting to each other, that we're providing, a truly seamless experience for travelers who are using this mode of transportation? It's going to be focused on improving and expanding the Mustang family of services, which is really that transit backbone for the state, provides the interregional transportation that then connects into local transit. Also how it would connect into future passenger rail services. It's fortuitous that this is happening right as we're getting into the statewide plan, because we're really going to have an opportunity to dive into the transit elements and then inform the projects that go into the eventual 10-year plan as part of this effort. So major deliverables from this right now, the team is working on a literature review of the current state of transit. So we're looking at all the major transit providers in the state, looking at our Mustang service and kind of figuring out where we have transit service, where we don't, where they connect, where they don't. And then we'll move into a gap analysis where we're trying to figure out from the data that we gathered in the literature review, where we do need to make connections, what it would take to establish those connections, and then maintain that service into the future. So we are expecting to have our final report around the end of the calendar year. We're going to be aligning with the statewide planning effort with some of our outreach. We are going to be doing additional outreach directly with the transit agencies and other stakeholders. This will be discussed at the Transit and Rail Advisory Committees in the coming months. TRAC does meet every other month. We have a meeting this afternoon, and then we'll be meeting again in July. Desiree Scott is the secretary for that meeting. Her email address is here. If you'd like to attend the TRAC meetings to observe or participate in any of those conversations, you're welcome to join us. But we will continue to provide updates. Our next scheduled update to the Transportation Commission, I believe, is in July or August. So we will continue to update the group as we proceed.
Heather.
I have a question with respect to when you're looking at the holes and trying to have greater connectivity throughout the state. Does somebody have to go to TRAC to actually get a part? Because you said that you're going to do outreach to transit agencies, but that means that there are holes that you're not going to hit. And I know that my region has expressed a huge hole, and we're trying to figure out how to best make sure that that is acknowledged and actually something's done.
Yeah, so I think in the first phase, we're going to identify what exists. In the second phase, we're going to identify the gaps, and we'll be actively reaching out in those gap areas as part of that, and then aligning with the statewide plan when they're doing their outreach as well.
Can you give me a timing on when that second phase happens?
It'll be later this summer, so like July, August.
And who will you reach out to? TPR chairs or the actual communities?
I think we're putting that list together now, but I'm happy to make sure that your Northwest TPR is on the list for sure. Yeah, and I think you would not have been overlooked. There's a lot going on with the passenger rail in that area.
Well,
so,
I'm not looking at rail. I'm trying to get a Mustang from Craig to Grand Junction.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, Ron.
Thanks, Kay. Will the transit connection study be doing specific transit planning within the MPO boundaries in the 5 MPOs as well, or is it statewide outside the MPO boundaries?
It's looking at all the transit statewide. So a lot of transit does exist within the MPO boundaries, but what we're going to be doing is looking at your existing plans within the area and then mapping them all out together statewide.
Okay, I would request that there be a specific coordination effort between the transit connection study and DRCOG specifically, just because of the size of our region, the size of our transit territory and transit services, and because as an MPO, we're required to include a consolidated transit plan as part of our metropolitan planning work, which we have in place. So I wouldn't want to just rely on TRAC for sort of the coordination, particularly at DRCOG.
Yep, no, we're happy to reach out to you. We are going to be working with RTD. Obviously, they're the major transit provider in the area, but yes, happy to include you in those conversations.
Dana, do you gonna have another question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're also doing a lot of transit planning this year as part of our 2050 plan. So it's actually, I think, really good timing. And I think TRAC is actually during statewide MPO meeting. So it makes it hard to be involved in TRAC when there's a conflict. So I don't know if it's possible to move one of those. I know it's hard to get standing meetings, but it might be nice to be able to attend TRAC regularly.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Dana, because we realized the same thing. We also have our transit monthly that is the same day as TRAC. So we are at the TRAC meeting today. We're looking at moving the TRAC meeting to, I think it's the 3rd or 4th Thursday of the month to avoid some of those conflicts. So
thank you.
So one of the things that we've done in the past in terms of transit planning, and we can see on the map various routes and things like that, and they go down and down, but they never connect. You know what I mean? If you go to the southern part of the state, you got Durango, and then you have to go way out the other side of Wolf Creek Pass before you can get another connection going north. And so we need to connect those to each other. You know what I mean?
yes, and that's really, you're outlining the need for the study. So appreciate that.
Good. Okay. Other questions? Gary?
Yeah, with the study, are you going to be looking at the maintenance and of the system once you do something? How it's going to be maintained and the funding streams to keep things operating? It's one thing to get things started, but the funding stream long-term to keep them operating or maintained, and facilities that go along with it.
Yes, financial stability of the services is part of the analysis.
And then are you looking at the ridership counts, making sure that if a service is put in place that you're actually getting enough riders to offset the impacts of those buses running? Because buses use a lot more fuel than a single passenger vehicle or smaller services.
So on a per passenger mile basis, transit does outperform single occupant vehicles. And if the transit vehicle is also an electric vehicle, the benefits increase. We have funding through the Clean Transit Enterprise to help transit agencies include electric vehicles in their fleets. But already transit does have a per passenger mile advantage over single occupant vehicle driving.
As long as you have enough ridership, that's the key when you're adding services, making sure those new services have enough ridership that you're not decreasing.
Yes, that's
possibly.
correct. Mhm.
Okay. Oh, Elizabeth,
Sorry, I'm hiding in the corner. Nobody puts baby. Hey, you may have mentioned this, I apologize. Tell me again how the expectation with the transit connection study is going to integrate with the TPRs, RTP updates that we're going to be starting, and when those presentations are going to start coming to the TPRs, because obviously some of us only meet quarterly.
So I don't believe we have outlined that yet. We're working with the statewide plan team to kind of coordinate outreach. Darius is nodding his head. So Darius is the one who's traditionally working with the TPRs. So we will be coordinating on that.
And does this supplant our previous transit component of our studies, or does this, is it a companion plan? What's the expectation?
We are looking at existing plans as part of the literature review. We're not starting from scratch, not starting with a blank sheet of paper.
Sure, I appreciate that. I meant like, we typically in our TPRs have our own transit plans. Is this taking place? Is this study kind of taking place of that? Or are we still going to have our kind of standalone plans that feed into the statewide plan?
I imagine that all the areas that are required to have a transit plan will still have a transit plan. What we're looking at is kind of an overarching transit connection study that aggregates all those plans and talks about how they work together. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
I think it's a couple of the items that you had mentioned, Elizabeth, is some of the stuff that we'll be talking about, at least conceptually today, and how we're going to have those initial conversations with the TPRs, how we're going to do public outreach, because we want to make sure that when we talk with a public perspective, folks think about transportation, not the siloed approach on there, knowing that some of these plans on there may have specific stakeholders and want to give the freedom to talk with those specific stakeholders. But we want to make sure that you being the TPRs, get all the information you need to meet your requirements for your plans as well.
Any other questions, comments?
Right, I think I have the next few slides.
I was
Okay.
gonna say, I didn't know if it was for the presentation. 'Cause-
Yes, we do have more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I did have a question for Chris too. If I didn't know if you wanted to go back. We can just, or I can wait till the end. It's okay.
We can do it right now. You don't mind, Chair?
No, that's fine.
So I did have a question on the GHG. With the new GHG 2.0 roadmap coming out and basically saying we're not going to be meeting our targets for 2025 and possibly not 2030. How is that going to get integrated into what you guys are looking at as far as the targets that we have to meet for this planning effort?
So I want to note that the targets for GHG that were mentioned in there are targets that were set by the Air Quality Commission, and they aren't necessarily baked into the roadmap per se. Plus, we aren't, when we're looking at this exercise, we're looking at 2030, 2040, and 2050. I think those were the dates on there. So we're going to be taking a fresh look at those items going forward. Are the new mix of projects going to meet the reduction in millions of metric tons as indicated on that slide that we've shown on there? And as I said before, it is one piece of the whole slice of things that are being done in the transportation sector in order to reduce GHG emissions. Also, I will note that in their inventory, they also have things that we don't control, such as off-road vehicles and aviation, which granted, they're not a huge slice of the pie, but that is stuff that's considered on there. So we will, we regularly have meetings with our partners, the Interagency Coordination Council and the ACC, in order to take a look at items as we go through. It has been a pretty quiet couple of months, besides the approval of the report that Dr. Cog did, which was accepted and showed compliance. But some of those items will come up. And I think one of the big item is some of our smaller MPOs have not been required to report yet. And that's one of the things we want to make sure that, since we've been through this a couple of times, we want to make sure it's a smooth process going forward and provide the support we need in order to make sure that we're able to have the technical verification from our partners at CDPHE, how to taking the report to the TC and everything else. So that's a very long-winded answer, but hopefully that answers your question.
You won't be opening up the rule again to address those changes as part of this effort, this planning effort?
So that's something that's hard to answer right now. I would say that what we would want to do is take a look at the current situation, and we can't right now we cannot open the rule because the rule is already open for a completely other reason. So that's something that we'll take into account throughout the planning process to see if there needs to be something on there, changes in population and whatnot. But we also don't want to change the rules in the middle of the game if a MPO partner, for example, is all the way through and then all of a sudden your things change and you have to start fresh. That's not something we necessarily want to do. So if there is a compelling reason, we may take a look at it, but it's not a guarantee. And of course, we'll make sure that we do it well ahead of time for the rural areas. So we're not doing this at the last minute and have the announcement and the outreach on anything like that. On table one, I think is the primary concern.
I appreciate that. And then the last thing, and Marissa had a great slide showing all the different interrelated programs. Now that we have all these enterprises, could we get an update of like the enterprises that CDOT manages and how you're basically going to be looking at incorporating those projects into your overall planning effort and how they talk to each other?
As far as an update from the enterprises, absolutely. We can ask the enterprises program.
Plans, right? So
Correct.
I guess I don't know, because a lot of times then I think CDOT is managing like a non-attainment enterprise, right? So how are those plans getting incorporated into your overall planning effort and how we're basically kicking these projects off the list for all of the funding that's coming through?
So it's an interesting question. The first question, yes, we can ask the enterprises program administrators and staff to come back and give updates on what the enterprise is doing. In fact, I can probably guarantee that the non-attainment one will be here at probably the November meeting, I think is what's on there. As far as integration with the overall planning effort, it depends on how they would integrate with primarily the 10-year plan and what has been done so far, which some of those questions may still be a little bit gray at this point, knowing that it does take a long time to have the enterprises set up. And I will also note that there is some separation between the enterprises themselves. I think where you're going to have a lot of I don't want to say integration because they are sort of separate entities, but where the enterprises have, through their boards, have approved support on 10-year plan projects is the CTIO, I'm forgetting the acronym of that right now, Colorado Transportation Investment Office, there we go, and the Colorado Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise.
Eva.
This is kind of a overlapping question with regards to the transit connection study and also GHG. And I just want to know, when you're looking at the transit connection study, are you going to be looking how that vision planning can actually help the MPOs with the reduction of greenhouse gases?
So I may ask Chris to go into more technical details, but I think the answer is yes. But I'll leave you, Chris, since you probably would know more than I would.
You know, I think it's a good question. Ultimately, this comes down to the exercise for the MPOs, right, is going to involve looking at the existing infrastructure and modeling then what the projects are for proposed new projects and infrastructure. I believe that, again, it would need to, you know, and I'm not super familiar with the connection study, so I'm learning about that today myself, but you know, if there would be improvements or projects proposed in the long range plan to increase transit, then those would and could be accounted for in the modeling exercise to demonstrate how those change consumer behavior and how those would reduce emissions as a result of more people not traveling in single occupancy vehicles. So I do think it would be accounted for, but I think that transit study, as I view it, would inform, right? Like maybe now here's a priority area for this particular MPO region, and it makes sense to, not only is it tying in different connection points, but you could then take credit for it if that became a project that was prioritized in the long range plan.
Let me kick off this next step, next section. We talk about the transportation equity plan. So consistent with state and federal regulations, and also the process that we go to build upon the efforts and continually improve our planning process. We're looking to expand our public engagement, analysis, and decision-making opportunities to make sure that we create and cultivate a meaningful and intentional public engagement process that benefits all communities, including disproportionately impacted communities. So basically what we're doing is developing a transportation equity plan. And this will help us to make sure that we have a inclusive and equitable transportation system and a process as we build out the statewide and the regional transportation plans. So basically this plan looks to cultivate strategic and tailored public engagement opportunities. We look to build upon our current equity analysis, and then just provide generally greater transparency and accountability to make sure that all the things that we're looking to do and prioritize are beneficial to everybody. So I'm happy to be joined by a Chief Equity Officer. Okay, Marcia Neslin. So Marcia, anything else you want to add?
No, I'm just, it's good to be here. It's been a while since I've been at STAC. But I'm looking forward to the partnership with DTD and looking at how we can share access and inclusivity for all people for the state of Colorado when we look at our planning process. So this is very exciting.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ron. Thank you. Really appreciate this. I want to express a special thank you to Federal Highway Administration and FTA that actually provided some opportunity for DRCOG to expand using some innovative engagement strategies for some of our planning work that go beyond sort of what's typically allowed. So things like paying stipends to participants, particularly low-income disadvantaged community members, to help them participate with us. So I wanted to alert you to that and maybe encourage CDOT to work with our federal partners to maybe explore opportunities that you might be able to tap into to expand, because it's proven to us to be really challenging to engage with these communities in our planning effort. And we're doing a lot of work to try to do that. And that was one of the strategies that we've been pursuing, is extra efforts, extra tools that we can bring to bear in our engagement activities. So hope you'll look for those opportunities.
Yeah, thanks. So also in terms of public engagement, and primarily based on the feedback that we received from STAC, we'll be looking to keep our branding very similar and more predominantly display the CDOT logo, but basically stick to that similar branding for the 2050 plan. And then additionally, as we move forward, as we're developing our public engagement plan, we want to make sure that the key themes are first and foremost throughout the plan, and those as we have identified now, our safety, mobility, and asset management. And we want to tailor our messages based upon those key themes, and then make sure that those key themes work in coordination with our transportation equity plan and what comes out of the PD 14 efforts. And so that will be sort of working to make sure that those key themes are public friendly and easy to understand and sort of carry us through the entire 2050 statewide plan and regional plan development process. And then lastly, in terms of data, we did a really great job in terms of developing a House Bill 1101 tool that looked at a number of data, and it just makes good sense, and it's just a good a good use of taxpayer dollars to just simply repurpose that tool and put that toward some of the data discussions that we'll have with the TPRs and MPOs. So we'll be looking at repurposing that tool for a lot of the performance-based and data-based discussions that will be forthcoming. And so looking forward to creating that interactive resource so that we can just continually improve upon data-based decision-making. And so I think with that, I will pass it back to Marissa.
So, we're starting to think about how we'll do MPO and TPR coordination, which is a really big part of this process. So looking at some of the lessons that we learned from when we did the 2045 statewide and regional plans, we're looking sort of at a similar timeline and schedule. And I think one of the things that we heard and I felt worked well too when we did the 2045 regional plans was we started and ended the process by having TPR chair meetings with each region. And so we're hoping to do that as part of this planning process too. So that will help us to scope out what the meetings will look like, how you want us to facilitate the meetings in your TPR, and just how you want that planning process to work. So we're hoping to have that maybe start when we kick off after we have some of the discussions about PD14 and the long range revenue projections, and of course know what the TPR boundaries are going to be. And then also for the rural TPRs, we're anticipating a series of 4 TPR meetings and then 1 transit and active transportation special session for each rural TPR. Adding the active transportation transit special session was something that we heard from the lessons learned study, and I think it'd be a great complement. So we'll be working with you to schedule those as we move forward. For the MPOs, since you all do your own planning process, we're looking to conduct one-on-one meetings with each of the 5 MPOs, just so we can discuss with you how CDOT can support your planning efforts, look for ways that we can coordinate our public engagement activities and things like that. Definitely want to see where it makes sense to partner so we're not duplicating efforts and causing stakeholder fatigue by trying to go out and duplicate efforts. So when you put all that into a schedule, we're looking at starting with the TPR chair meetings sometime this summer, and then followed that with going out to meet with each of the TPRs. The first meeting, I think, will be pretty high level, similar to what we did last time, where we discussed the TPR, and this is for the rural TPRs, the mission and vision. We'll look at sort of the progress we've made since you adopted your 2045 regional transportation plan, and then identify focus areas. Meeting number 2, which we anticipate to be more in the fall of 2024, will be sort of a more robust discussion around goals, objectives, and performance measures. This should be really good timing because I think we'll have some decision points on PD14 at that time that we can bring to the table. We can pair that with looking at data trends, patterns, identified issues. And then I'm really happy to be joined here today by Elijah Henley with FHWA. So for applicable TPR, something that we started last time and we hope to further expand on for this planning process is the integration with central federal lands. So he'll talk more about that next, but I think that will occur in TPR meeting number 2 as well. We'd also hope to have that transit active transportation special session in the fall of 2024. And then moving on to sort of the winter meeting number 3, that's where we can get into, I think, hoping to get into more conversations about project priorities, since we'll have the performance measures to guide that discussion. And we'll also have public input and stakeholder input that will help guide that discussion as well. And we'll talk about corridors and travel shed visions and priorities. And then that leads us into the spring of 2025, where we hope to have
some draft regional transportation plans developed, and we can then end the process with another TPR chair meeting. Obviously, this is a very loose outline, but want to work with you guys on on how to put more structure to this and get your ideas. But this was built what worked well last time.
Okay, Suzette.
So I know this question may not be for anybody at the table, but we have all collectively put in some money for a household travel survey. And we have heard nothing from that. And I would assume that that is some things that would be very beneficial when you're starting to do your statewide plan, and it would also have been beneficial for all of us that were doing our MPO plans. I'm just curious where this is at. I know we got delayed by COVID, but it has gotten very dark and we don't know what's happening.
So I can answer that, Suzette. So we're continuing to work on the survey right now. They have sent out, I don't remember the name of the consultant that Eric is working with, but they did send out the notices and the requests for gathering the data, and they have done that so far. And I don't think we're necessarily done yet with the gathering the data and them supplying that. I anticipate we will have some more information at a later meeting because we're still in the middle of this project. I'll even note that our mailbox was just jam-packed of items of surveys that we couldn't get back. So just making sure that we're getting the right mix of folks in order to be a representative sample of the population. So it is going forward on there, and I can provide more information at the next meeting or by email if that helps.
Yeah, either way, it's great. It's just been a long time coming, and sort of hits the back burner, I think. So it'd be great to hear what's going on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and maybe it's more than one meeting. We'll have to sort of work with you to scope this out. But yeah, I mean, the goal of putting this in there was just to facilitate a broader meeting. You guys do so much as TPRs, but sometimes there's only so much time that we have and so many meetings on the agenda that this was just to try to get that at broader engagement. But I do think, like Kay was saying, this will be a good opportunity to integrate with the work from the transit connection study to share some data that we get from that and analysis from that. I don't think one meeting is going to solve all of our problems, but I think it might help us think about investments and priorities and get and be able to articulate some of those needs in the regional transportation.
So thank you for that input, Brian. I think this is kind of a general outline. We want to work with you and see what's best for your region, because we know not every region is the same and has their different issues on there. So I think kind of we're just starting the process right now. One of the things that we're working on internally is getting that data piece together, because that's something that instead of printing out literally thousands of maps that we did last time, is can we use technology and some of the stuff that we have internally with GIS in order to have that available. So it's not a paper map that you have to be at a meeting to. You can look at it at any time that you would want. But appreciate that feedback, and we can have those discussions on what works with the individual TPRs as we go through this process in the next few weeks. Absolutely. And even, we're going to get to an overall timeline on here. Again, this is all fairly draft and fairly outlined, and we can make adjustments on here knowing that the ultimate end deadline to be done with everything, I think, and Marissa and our federal partners need to correct me, we do need to have a next federal plan. We want to have it done by August of 2025. I cut myself short there a little bit. But if we don't have it by August of 2025, it's not the end of the world. I think our ultimate end deadline is when we need to have the next step done by 2026. I think it's April or May 2026. So we did built in several months leeway for ourselves, knowing that that's when the current iteration, at least from our end, our current iteration of the 10-year plan, the 4-year prioritized plan ends at that point. And we want to make sure we're ready to have something to go for that next step.
Go ahead, Ron.
Appreciate this process on the TPR engagement. And I think that'll be helpful. Clarifying question, are you anticipating, is this a series of 4 meetings and each meeting includes all of the TPRs, or is it an individual meeting sort of on this cycle with each individual TPR? Okay. And then just a reminder that although DRCOG is an MPO, we are also a TPR, and we have non-MPO portion of the DRCOG boundary that is a TPR. So don't forget about us in this cycle so that we can participate with you on the non-MPO part of DRCOG as well in the plan.
Ron, absolutely. And if we did forget that, that would mean that I haven't been paying attention all these months I've been going to your meetings.
I should state Holly Williams here, Pikes Peak also has a TPR within it.
Absolutely. And I think Dana does as well. All right.
Yes, we do as well.
All right. I think I don't think Pueblo does, right? They do. So it's just North Front Range. All right. All right.
Well,
We are the
and-
ones that are different.
what we're
Okay.
thinking though is truly a meeting in Steamboat Springs in September, and Heather can host. And she'll find a hotel for us and y'all can pay for it. And we would like to take a bus staying up there.
Interesting suggestion. I'll take it into account, and I'll have to ask my boss if we have the funds for it.
Well, don't
We
tell her
don't.
it was my idea.
Oh, Gary.
Yeah, I'll talk about active transport and transit and the greenhouse gas reductions. And on the list of priorities, asset management was at the bottom. Asset management is preserving the system to have the buses, the active transport on, all those things. I feel like we're emphasizing adding more to the system when we don't have enough money to maintain the base system that provides the basis for all of these things we want to do. How is that going to be integrated into the planning process on prioritization of the asset management when we don't have enough? We have bridges in the metro areas throughout the state that are still falling behind on maintenance. And those are the resiliency and the connection that we have to have for the rest of all this to work. Where are we emphasizing that in our planning process for the planning partners to realize we don't have enough money to keep the current system operating into the future? We're doing projects to buy us 5 years on I-70, maybe hopefully 10 years when it's going to have to be redone again. We're falling behind on this, the maintenance and asset management. And all I've heard in this is we're going to add more active transport in my region. Each of the towns maybe have a mile that would be something we need to discuss. The transit, we have networks that are working and meeting the needs generally. It'd be great to have a fixed service connecting to Denver, but the ridership's not there to justify it. So those things are great to talk about and look at planning for the future. but where are we in the planning process to maintain the system? Where is that being included?
Thank you for bringing that up because I was going to mention that at the end. Absolutely, your points about maintaining the service. We have to take care of the current system, knowing that even though we want to encourage a lot of travel choices, there's still going to be a lot of folks, and probably the majority of the travel is still going to be on our highways and our current network. And we have to take care of that. And as the points you had noted on there, how can we take care of what we currently have on there? And I think that's one of the things that we want to talk about in these meetings. We didn't necessarily mention here, but one of the main goal areas is asset management. And that primary piece that we're going to take a look at is the condition of the pavement. And more to come on that probably at our next meeting when we take a look at PD 14 and looking at the overall goal for the entire system. Also taking a look at what those needs would be in each region and using some of the data that we have over here. We have a robust collection of the two biggest assets we have, which is the pavement and the bridges. We have robust data that we want to make sure that's available. So that way we can make informed decisions about the projects that we're going to go forward over the next 20 years. So hopefully that answers that question somewhat. Okay. At least if I met you 50%, I think it's a win.
I think just the way this led off, if the planning process starts off with all these other things and then asset management's the last thing we talk about, I think that's a disservice to the entire state. I think we need to start off with the asset management, preserving what we have. And these are the things we'd like to add when funding becomes available, or the funding streams that are in place for those different pieces.
Appreciate the input. I will note when we have the transit and active transportation special session, one of the active transportation is seem to fit well with the transit. And in the transit, we have to have our own separate transit plans per federal regulation. Plus, it's a huge initiative of the administration. But I think a lot of our first meeting is going to be taking a look at that data and where the needs are going to be at on here. And also, we will kick off with some of the needs and what we know right now about the system with the TC in a couple of weeks. And then we'll come back and have that same conversation with this group and show what we have.
Just one last comment on the greenhouse gas reduction. One of the best ways to reduce increased greenhouse gas is to make sure we maintain the system early and not let things continue to fall behind. Because as we have to fully replace things, the greenhouse gas impact increases with the amount of construction and transportation just in those pieces, or alternate routes that have to be used that add 6 to 8 hours of travel time for everything. So just consideration, asset management addresses almost all of these up front and then helps reduce those.
In the interest of time, I'm not going to read through all of the state requirements. There will be a quiz at the next STAC meeting. No. But we will cover these when we have the first meeting, so everyone's very familiar. And there are links at the end of this presentation for the, where to find these requirements if you want to do some reading. This was summarized sort of in the previous slides, but this is a draft timeline that we've put together with the goal of trying to get the 2050 statewide plan and regional transportation plans adopted roughly by August of 2025. Again, the federal requirement is just that the plans have a 20+ year time horizon. So if that doesn't align with when your TPR meetings are happening, or we need another month or two, there is flexibility there. We are trying to use that information to guide the next update of the 10-year plan, hoping to have that 10-year plan update occur. You know, there'll be parts that will occur in tandem with your long-range plan development, but we'll need to do some obviously greenhouse gas modeling and things like that. But looking at having a 10-year plan update follow along maybe by the end of 2025. So this is a draft timeline. Take a look at it. Is subject to changes as we hear more from you. Wanted to just
see, we've had a lot of great discussion so far as we've gone along. If we have a little time, you know, would love to hear any other thoughts you might have. You know, how you would see and how you would define a successful planning process, what you think some of the challenges and opportunities would be, and, you know, any suggestions that you have for us as we move forward with developing the important elements of the plan, which could be public engagement, how we format our documents. Speaking of how we format our documents, all of our documents will now be accessible. So we're looking at different ways of communicating information that's more accessible to all, messaging, things like that. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Anything else, guys?
Okay, well, you can be thinking about it between now and the next meeting, more to come. But one thing I think that you guys could be doing now is just encouraging the members of your TPRs to take a look at your 2045 plan. A lot of work went into those plans. I think if you can encourage the members of your TPR to, and they're not long documents, we try to be very concise. So most I think are about 20 pages long. If you can encourage members of your TPR to look at your plans, there are some great appendices attached to those plans as well with technical information. I think that will just make sure that we can really have a really great planning meeting and are ready for.
Suzette?
Yeah, I would just offer that we do a lot of extensive public outreach, more than happy to coordinate anything that would work with you guys.
We would really like that.
Gary?
Yeah, just to give feedback on one of your questions you asked, so you have at least one. I think one of the biggest challenges with any planning process we've ever been through is keeping the reality of the funding availability for the things that people want. I mean, even in my TPR, I've had people bring up, well, we need the state to help do this county road. Well, okay, so what part of a state highway do you want the state not to take care of to start trying to help take care of your county roads? I mean, those conversations need to be very upfront with people. Is we are funding constrained. We don't have enough to maintain what we have in reality. And so anything you're asking to add is going to take away from maintaining what we have. So, or we need to find new funding. That's one of the conversations that needs to be stressed, is we need more funding for transportation in the state. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is trying to balance that wish list for the 2050 and where we're at with the actual funding availability. So that's one I think we need to be very cognizant of and upfront with people as we move through the process.
Herman?
Oh, I was just gonna say Emily Hadaway's on, so and I know we're running way low on time, but if you
Yep.
want her to give a brief legislative update, she's in between hearings, so she could do that if you want.
You say she is here or she's on her way here?
She's on Zoom right now.
On Zoom? Okay. Okay with you guys? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I am definitely in the middle of quite a lot here. We're just a few days away from session wrapping up. We had a really great week, though, so far. Our first bill has passed all committees and is out of onto the governor for signature. So that is SB 100, our commercial motor vehicle safety bill. Our distracted driving bill is out of one chamber and will be up on the House floor tomorrow. That's SB 65. Our transit and rail funding bill is up as well on the House floor tomorrow and has passed the Senate. That is SB 184. And let's see, what are the other big updates? We just introduced a big additional transit funding bill called SB 230, which is the committee that we're about to hear soon in the Senate. I do have a comprehensive fact sheet on that. I think that is one of the bills that reading just the statute itself doesn't give the full picture. And so I'm happy to pass that on to Darius and Aaron to send that on to everyone to read through the fact sheet. But given that we've got a short amount of timing here, I'll just open it up for questions if there's any specific bills that we really want to touch on.
Did you want to talk about 1313?
I just had a question, Holly Williams, Pikes Peak, about House Bill 1313, if the holding hostage of highway user tax funds had been taken out of that.
Yes, the HUTF section has been removed from 1313. There are now just a few sections left related to CDOT that are pretty straightforward studies. So those are our only inclusions in the bill now. The HUTF sections have been removed.
Thank you.
Anybody has anything else? Well, thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks. So one of the programs today that I wanted to get in as soon as we could is Central Lands Coordination and Program Overview. Elijah.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. I'm happy to be here again today. I find myself at the end of the agenda and running late again. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if we want to go full. I think I planned it to be 20 minutes. Do we want to just go through that now? Or I'm going to give the same presentation tomorrow at the statewide MPO meeting, but that won't have the TPRs there. But I think I can work without slides. Those are in there for the record. I think just building on what Marissa and the rest of the team just presented, we're working with their team. Well, first I want to, someone on my team who's not here today, Jolene Hall. She's part of our professional development program. She's coming over to CDOT to join Marissa's statewide team for the update, as well as doing dual purpose working with Marcia and Selena in the equity office. So pretty excited about that. So we'll be really ingraining ourselves in that schedule and coordinating and very much trying to work out, because I appreciate on her slide that we'll try to hit one of these TPR meetings to go through. In the last round, we identified a bunch of stuff statewide. It was a real barn burner because I caught Marissa at the end of the cycle. We didn't work out a lot of the mechanics of, okay, cool, we know we have needs out there, but to build on Gary's point, like with the funding, asset management, new needs, how do we even figure any of that out? When you in each TPR already have a huge backlog of projects, and then we identify a bunch of more projects, it just, there's a big backlog. So I think this round is not so much focused on trying to identify new need, but validate what we saw in the first round, and then try to work through mechanically, what is that low-lying fruit, high priority, low cost kind of things we can start working on. And the big goal here is our federal program, the Federal Lands Access Program, is most relevant to everyone in this room, $10 million a year. Continue to work on how can we better ingrain that in the processes you have and the other funding programs that may be able to be shared with or could be looked at to see complementary. And for our other big program, the Federal Lands Transportation Program, which is federal dollars that go to the federal agencies, it's butter so thin on the bread. They're spending that all within their boundary, but at a minimum, it would be good to understand what that total need is as well, because I believe it will start to inform how we look at the access program and the extent to which we can figure out where they have a priority and there's adjacent state or county road that leads to that priority, just being able to line that up, because the project selection process is distinctly different for both programs. On the one, we do a call for projects for access. And on the other, each partner, 6 of the core partners, pick their own projects, either nationally or regionally. So how these priorities get lined up isn't really great when we rely solely on just project selection. So what we're hoping to do in this process is try to align where those priorities are better. So I think the goal would be to do an update workshop at each TPR, one time within this planning cycle to update all those needs. When exactly the timing's right to do that, we'll continue to figure that out. And I think one thing we did not do, didn't have time to really even get to last round was engagement with MPO. So this round, there certainly is an intent to do a more concerted effort. We'll talk about that next week, because I'll be, like I said, I'll be giving these slides next week at the MPO meeting is, you know, it's a little different. We're like, you end up being most of those federal lands being outside of your planning boundary. You know, Grand Valley is one MPO where it's that whole Mesa County. So that's probably the highest concentration. And we were able to get a full section built out in their plan for 2045 plan. But for all the other MPOs, we didn't really put anything in there. And so Dr. Cog, you've got some fish and wildlife units and some other units within their boundary. I know up in North Front Range, Horsetooth is a reclamation unit, and you got a big chunk of flap there for that one. So most of the lands are outside of your planning boundary, but good to coordinate there. And I don't know with Pueblo how much we have around there. I don't know there's as much federal lands maybe is relevant, but this round, we definitely want to do more concerted effort to engage with MPOs. And then TPRs around the room, like Northwest, Intermountain, and Central Front Range. We taught them at the real tail end. We didn't really get a complete list of needs. So I think there's more of an effort to identify what the needs are. But again, I think the big goal is trying to get a better sense. A lot of feedback we got last time was, particularly on the federal side, is a lot of those locals, I was calling or emailing a week and a half before a TPR meeting to come workshop. And then after that, we didn't really have a structured place where they're going to come back again. So this time around, more deliberate. We're at the beginning of the process to try to engage more early with the FLMAs so they have a better sense of what's coming up, give them a better handle on what the role is going to be. So then coming out of that next workshop, we'll have a little more continuity of follow-up, what we're going to do going forward as we slowly, I guess, try to chip away at these needs. I would say that one of the things I've always struggled to figure out the right time to that right way to have the conversation, but it seems like new revenue streams on recreational travel standpoint, and you know, what are those options? How can we look at that? You know, fees are obviously entrance fees and transportation fees. Federal agencies already collected. They're very difficult to increase, but it seems like it's at some point new revenue has to come from somewhere. And is there an opportunity in this cycle to have conversations about innovative finance and financing fees? Just throw that out there. I don't know when the right timing is at, and it's very sensitive, but I think ultimately, if we're not able to find new revenue streams, our ability to deliver anything more than pay to system preservation, because right now on our programs for federal lands, really all we do mostly is just, and we can't even come anywhere near up close to just taking care of the base infrastructure. The Park Service is maybe the one agency where they've actually made a shift to put more money into alternative transport, into active transportation and transit. So there's some room there. For the other agencies, they're just struggling on base infrastructure rehabilitation that they need help on. So you know, those are kind of the two things. So I guess I'll stop there. More to come. We're going to work through with Aaron and his team, and I'll have someone on my team on that team. So more to come, and then trying to schedule a time when we can do a follow-up workshop in this time around with the MPOs, but also with all the TPRs.
Questions?
So are you guys directly going to be connecting to us?
Yes.
All right.
I mean, yes. And I think the more long answer is trying to figure out a schedule when to expect that, I think is certainly right now what I'm working on is trying on the federal land side, try to mobilize all of them. So the next month, trying to get them all prepped up and ready to go. And then once we have I think those first set of TPR meetings in fall, but you know how she had the number 2 meeting, number 3 meeting, number 4 meeting. At some point in one of those quarterly meetings, we'll figure out when the timing's best to try to do an add-on workshop or something in your region. So we will be in touch.
Great.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, Brian, I appreciate that. Like last time around, I think I scrambled to try to do a really rushed Intermountain meeting, did one virtual meeting, try to capture some things and then left. And it was so fast at the end. We didn't have enough prep time before or after to anything to really take root. So 100% try to give more lead time on your side with read ahead material and everything else, and also on the federal land side, so that when people come together, they're better prepared. Yeah.
Okay. Darius, Where's Darius? You want to talk about MMOF?
Yes, MMOF. So this is a proposal that we're bringing forward for comment on here regarding the MMOF process. And I'm going to turn it over to the MMOF program administrator, Mr. Michael Snow, and he'll go through the presentation.
And it's a little awkward, but I'm staying back here because I'm really well plugged in, as you can tell. It would take half an hour to move up 6 feet. So as Darius talked about earlier, we're probably all anxiously awaiting the TC's approval of any updates to the formula and further allocation of MMOF funding, which of course, can set us in motion to do subsequent project selection processes. So rather than talk about any of that today, I want to talk about a few things as we get ready for those new project selections and things to consider, including the match reduction formula and an update to that. Oh, I got a clicker. Thank you. What we want to spend a little more time talking about is CDOT's involvement and in support of the TPRs and those application processes. So we want to take a little time to talk about that with you. And then in terms of our support of those as well, we are proposing a webinar that'll support some of your MMOF applicants, talk about the program itself, but also just the dynamics and expectations around having a grant funded project, because that's often challenging. And then we want to talk about competitive selections as one of the requirements for any publicly funded grants. And then we'll talk about our next steps as we move forward and await the TC's approval of the funding. So the match rate formula is currently based on and uses 4 different criteria that use 2019 data. And to keep that in line with our updates to all the other formulas in program distribution and those that that the STAC has recommended for the distribution formula, we want to update that formula with 2021 data so that it aligns with those. The memo in your packet gives you some summary of how that creates changes, and it might be maybe surprising to see how some cities and counties match reduction status changes when we're talking about just a 2-year change in funding. But we also have to be cognizant that we're talking about a change from 2019, which is pre-COVID, to 2021 that is in the middle of COVID. And things did change economically in the state. There was actual physical movement. There were a lot of dynamics changing, and the cost of things were skyrocketing, et cetera. So the combined effect of that is that it did shift some numbers around for a number of towns and counties. So again, in your packet, I don't recall what page, but it does give a list of which towns and counties have a change in their match requirement with this update. Ron asked me earlier today, how does this apply to awards when we make an update to this match formula? And as we did in 2021, the same will be true for this one. That is that when it's adopted, if it's adopted by our TC, it applies to all subsequent awards of projects, not to subsequent years of funding. So in other words, when you have an award of future years funds made already, it does not affect that. It's only a new decision for an award. So it affects all those moving ahead. Questions on that? Okay, so the TC will consider this alongside the distribution formula update next month. All right, so let's get back now to the realities of MMOF. I mean, first off, let me start off on a positive foot, and that is that this program has put out over $300 million to nearly 300 projects spread out statewide. And that's fantastic because I've seen a lot of and heard a lot of great stories of particularly rural and small areas that have seen some active transportation and infrastructure improvements that they haven't seen in many decades. That's great for those rural areas. But the reality is there's also challenges. There are towns and counties doing projects with resources they have not really had in a long time. And that makes it challenging to deliver public infrastructure projects. We are seeing this in the numbers. And so on the screen is just a quick, sort of status on where has the MMOF funding gone so far. And even those projects we awarded 4 years ago, less than half of those funds are spent yet. That might be surprising to some. To some, that looks like a terrible use of public funds. And others say, no, that's just what it takes to deliver infrastructure projects. And there's some of it is, both of those are partly true. So, I just hear a lot of the anecdotal. I'm not a project manager to oversee these type of projects myself, but I hear a lot of stories about the kind of things that have caused delays. Acknowledging that some of it is just COVID cost and market impacts during that time. But a lot of them were due to unanticipated costs or projects proposed with scopes that were, underestimated costs or didn't recognize certain aspects that of construction that would have to be included. And those applicants then were surprised by that, way after they've gotten an award, and now they're faced with additional costs, and that causes delays. So long list of reasons that cause delays that I won't go into. But what has been very apparent to our local agency teams that oversee the projects is that most of them could have been avoided with a much more thorough review and delving into the details of the projects that are proposed. The TPRs are fully in control of project selections, and CDOT has always supported that. But with a little deeper examination of the projects that were proposed, our staff have largely said we could have avoided a lot of delays and had much greater success with the projects that have been awarded had we had the opportunity to do that. So the obvious answer to that and where we're going is CDOT staff intend to do a mandatory review of all the MMOF applications. And that would be an effort to support your applicants to help them develop properly scoped and really well-informed applications. And of course, that means as TPRs, you're now receiving a much clearer picture of what's being presented. And we ultimately can see greater success on those projects and support the TPRs and MPOs in making the smartest decisions today and helping the applicants and the awardees be better prepared as they move through implementation. What did I miss? I guess what I want to get to then is, what are the roles that we're playing here? What are we talking about? And I want to, it's bold here, and that is that the TPRs, the MPOs, this is not to infringe on what is your authority in making project selections. That's paramount, and we will not be getting in the way of that. We just want to enable the organizations to make better decisions. So TPR, so CDOT, our involvement will continue to be, reviewing the applications for project eligibility, which we do, but that entails making sure we understand all of the aspects of a project that's being proposed so that we catch those eligibility issues up front. We'll continue to provide an application template. Most of the TPRs have used those in the past. Some, particularly MPOs, have modified the content of them to their own needs, and that's totally up to all of you. We will also lay out and schedule a webinar that your applicants can be pointed to. We'll provide at least a couple of those, and that gives them a chance to ask questions specific to the MMF program, but also to the expectations if they're getting a publicly funded grant. What's next? So then the consultations that we used to require, it used to be that we strongly recommended a CDOT consultation. And back in 2022, DTR said, Division of Transit and Rail said, on transit projects, we want that to be mandatory. So this is different now. Instead, we're going to just be involved with a much more thorough review of all of them. And those consultations are not required. So if a consultation is desired, applicants can still ask for that to get with any of the subject matter experts with CDOT if they have questions. And if any project applications are complicated enough that a paper review isn't enough, CDOT might ask for consultations with some of the applicants. This is a required review. CDOT will review all of them, and they'll review them during the draft process, the drafting of the applications. So what this obviously leads to is that the application processes need to be fragmented, or rather staged, so that there is a draft application phase, and gives CDOT staff the time to review those and provide input back to your applicants before they're finalized. What else? Questions about that so far? Otherwise I'll keep going. All right. Yes,
Okay,
Ron.
Ron?
Thank you, Vince. So Michael, I guess, look, I don't have a particular issue with CDOT wanting to partner with the TPRs on reviewing projects. I think it's personally, I think it's perhaps a little bit of an overstep if a project is not on a state highway for the state to mandate that they do a review, but I'll let the TPRs fight that out with you and have that conversation. I do wonder about the staffing impacts on CDOT staff to be this involved in reviewing every MMOF project, and whether this will take CDOT staff resources away from working on grant agreements with folks that already have received awards of grants, because I know that's been a big issue, and I am concerned about the workload impact on CDOT staff when we already have issues with getting grant agreements for projects that have already been awarded funds, and now CDOT wants to spend a bunch of CDOT staff time on reviewing new applications. So I just need some assurance that it's not going to have a further impact on delays on getting grant agreements.
I think our RTDs can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's two different people or two different groups. The regions, the engineers would be working with applicants to determine their readiness and things like that. And they're not the ones that execute the grant agreements. Your point is well taken. I don't think providing additional region support will take away from trying to move forward on grant agreements. Is that fair?
Elizabeth.
Some of our TPRs are already set up to where CDOT is an executive member of our executive team and is already reviewing our applications with us as part of this process. So if we're already set up that way, I'm not sure what the intent of this is.
So, yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And actually, the note at the bottom of this slide speaks somewhat to that. What we are proposing is that the TPRs work with CDOT staff to afford within their application and selection timeline a draft review. So instead of getting applications and they're completed and then they're reviewed and CDOT is involved with that, instead there's an opportunity to give feedback to the applicant in the middle of that application so that the applications are more thorough. And then because CDOT does not intend to weigh in on any of the criteria and the merits of the project. And otherwise, we're not there. We're not saying we're going to come in and tell you which projects we think you should be selecting. But as you've mentioned, some TPRs may wish to invite CDOT staff to be directly on those selection committees, in which case they would have the opportunity to weigh in on the merits and the prioritization of them.
Go ahead, excuse me, Suzette.
I know we look alike, right? Elizabeth.
Pardon me?
I said we look alike, Elizabeth and Suzette. So Michael, if in the prior slide, you're talking about providing an application template and things like that. If we already have something in place, are we good to go? I mean, like the Upper Front Range, you know, we do have CDOT that sits on our TAC. They do review. We do have Region 4 staff that does review projects that impact the state system. And then also additionally in MPOs, you know, we also have this tip delay that, you know, we make sure the projects keep moving. So if the process is already set up like that, are you proposing anything different to that?
No, not at all. So there's, you know, I think every MPO probably has a different level of experience of how CDOT is already involved and how well your selection processes maybe have already addressed some of the issues that we see playing out in these selected projects. The application that we've recommended has always been a suggestion and is, you know, used fully by some regions and not needed at all by some others, such as MPOs who have, you know, have much more, been developing their selection processes and applications for a long time. So I hope that answers the question. This is all flexible, right? The only thing that's mandatory is the CDOT will review things to the level that they feel they need to do what we think is in everybody's best interest to get the best applications possible. And if that means more in one region as it does to another, that will be decided by each of those regions and sets of CDOT staff.
Heather.
Real quick, when we all decided on the MMOF funding, I know that there was conversation around the CDOT, chunk of whatever money that was going to be taken to do this oversight. I guess my concern with what this conversation is around is really coming down to funding and costs. And it looks like there's going to be more oversight, which then I may not be here and who knows how long will lead to the next funding formula conversation of, hey, CDOT needs more money for oversight. And I want to make sure that it's on the record that we're all saying there's a lot of whys in this room as to why are we doing this, because we're all seeing dollars spent from CDOT staff. I understand the need. I understand that there are circumstances, but is this the greatest step forward for the long term to get rid of the quote unquote bad apples? And will there always be bad apples, or is there a different mechanism to deal with this than imposing more staff time and ultimately time through this process?
Can I make a suggestion?
Go
So
ahead.
I think it would be really valuable to have the MPO and the TPRs get together and do like a workshop of kind of lessons learned. I mean, I've been the manager for 2 years, and I know the first year we did it, we had some lessons that we've learned, and this past go around, we also had some additional lessons learned when we went through the whole process of creating criteria. And we have a really good relationship with our region too. And so they were really valuable for us, but I think it would, it's always worthwhile to hear from other MPOs and TPRs, like, what are your lessons learned, and what criteria do you include into your selection? And that might be really valuable for us to know, like, hey, what did you guys do? And we can do it differently.
Good, Gary.
Yeah, I think it's good to have some of that oversight. Region 4 has done a good job with our TPR, but our TPR has kind of had to morph into all this because we hadn't really done all the contract, all those things. It's all new, and I think that's part of the problems. This was a very rushed new funding source that came out through all the COVID pandemic stuff, and it was a lot of money was pushed out without a lot of thought on where it was actually going to be spent. So I think a lot of that was because it was so rushed up front. And I think some of the reviews, as long as we don't add a lot of that staff time beyond and take more funding out of it to cover that, I think is probably good. But as long as it's been that transition for the TPRs, I think is the biggest factor we faced the last several years, is getting TPRs that never did that up to speed to now doing that sort of thing.
Darius, were you about? No. Oh. So I'm just gonna answer to the couple last comments, and that what is gonna look different to all of you here is that there might be a little bit more staff involvement at a time and in a way that you see it happening. But what is going to actually be reduced is the amount of staff time that is already spent on projects that have unintended impacts and delays. So those MMOF admin set-aside funds are being used by our project managers, by our region's specialty staff, by everybody who already and has to provide project oversight. But they're actually going to be saving time and money by providing more involvement upfront and getting clear project scoping and costs. And ultimately, we should see less overall CDOT staff time spent supporting these and overseeing these projects.
Go ahead.
Can I just add on to that? I think that CDOT has really good local agency teams. And so just to give you guys an idea of what we do in the Upper Front Range is we partner with our CDOT local agency team when a call is occurring, and we set up a meeting to allow the communities to actually meet with the local agency team so that they can work through some of these questions for applications. So they're not wasting their time if they're not going to meet the criteria on submitting something to begin with. So we have CDOT staff available to all of our regions right now that we can take advantage of. And it's just a matter of how your TPR wants to include that local agency meeting as part of your overall process. So maybe we could just, I feel like this sounds a little more like oversight than really the intent, because I think a lot of us already do this. So maybe we could just revise it to just read that it's coordination with our local agency team.
Gary, did you have something?
Suggestion.
Okay. Other questions?
Okay. All right. So we've had questions. Let's move on. So as being the state and CDOT having responsibility to oversee the use of all public funds, there's a long list of requirements that we have to ensure. Every project that's funded, we have to ensure that they follow certain regulations and restrictions. It's a long list of requirements, but one in particular applies to all sorts of funding, federal or state, any that the CDOT and the state has to oversee through grants, and that is that the use of or the award of funds must go through a competitive selection process. And this is spelled out, one of many regulations, and then it comes from some of the guidance from our state controller's office, which is basically a further guidance defining what is in our state law or in our fiscal rules and so forth. That requires that when we make project selections, there's an actual competitive selection. And there's three components that define a competitive selection. One is that there's an application process. We all do that. That's not anything different. But what gets a little different for some is that they must be assessed on the basis of evaluation factors. That means there's a conscientious effort to look at particular criteria and make some type of an evaluation for each of those projects. And then the third point, which is determining which are the best application choices. This seems very obvious to some, but what is different for many is that we saw, particularly in the last selection process, there were a number of situations where the TPR or the MPO chose, rather than to fund some projects and not fund other projects, there was a compromise made to provide partial funding to a number of projects. And what that does is, one, it undermines the competitive process. There's not an actual evaluation of projects side by side and then a selection of one project over another. But it also meant that we had a lot of MMWF projects left partially funded. And that's a disadvantage both to the applicants and to the program itself. So we're going to be encouraging our TPRs and MPOs to take the time to consider how you'll evaluate the projects side by side and come up with a way and a method that you'll prioritize and evaluate those and prioritize which get selected and which are not. So questions about that or comments?
Ron.
Michael, you mentioned MPOs in that, and are you suggesting that we are not allowed to make partial awards to projects through a call for projects in the solicitation process when we're allocating funding through a grant program administered by the MPO? Because we do just what you described sometimes.
No, I'm fully aware of that. And we are not saying that is a disallowed practice, but there were absolutely TPRs that consciously made the decision to not compare projects side by side and instead reduce the funding amount requested for every single one of them. And so we absolutely have, we know that this has impacted some projects. It is not a great, it's not really going to support too many projects if they're all partially funded, because they then are going to have to sit until they get the rest of the funding together. So we're not saying you can't. And again, this is just like, are getting involved in reviewing the projects. We're not saying that there isn't some review, and we're not saying that there isn't some competitive nature to the selection, but we're all in this together, and we want successful projects, and we want to use our public funds as best we can. So we want to work together to ensure the selection processes do that. Okay, so I think we're running pretty late, but so some recommendations, and I don't necessarily need to go through them with you all here, but we do encourage everybody to, as you get ready for project selections, to work with CDOT staff and particularly your planning staff to coordinate and schedule a timeline that affords CDOT the time they need to get a review of your draft applications and to provide you all the input that will help you with that selection process. But that also means to have a competitive process that you're going to want to sit down and think about, how do you prioritize? How are you going to evaluate projects? And if that's a scoring or some other means that you determine to prioritize some types of awards over another, that's completely up to you, and we're here to support you doing that. But we want to encourage you to take the time to do that before you start your selection processes. One of those things that I think everybody needs to consider too is that there are still projects that have yet to acquire all the funding they need. And that's always an option. So you don't necessarily have to make all new awards. TPRs can also consider making supplemental awards. So that's something to consider. And as I've said, we do encourage fully funding projects as much as possible so that there are fewer projects delayed and awaiting their full funding. The other thing is, I think we just say issue award letters to the applicants. Last time around we did this, it actually took some time to get clear information from everybody. And this is just a coordination thing between all of you and CDOT, is to make sure that when awards are made, it's not just left to a list that's put in the minutes of a meeting, but rather we get some proper documentation of what was awarded and any dollar amounts and expectations in that. Again, we'll work with you and our region staff will work with you to facilitate all that. Oh yeah, Suzette.
So just, this is maybe a little more direct for the North Front Range MPO, but we were holding off doing our call for projects with MMOF because we knew there were some changes coming. So we still have not programmed our 24 funds. So my question is, when are we going to get those totals? When are we going to know what those 24, 25, 26 totals are? Because we have not seen those yet. And so we're thinking that, we want to go out for a call for projects fairly soon, but
Yeah.
I don't know when we're going to get those numbers. Do you have?
So I'm hoping we could have that. If the commission approves the new distribution formula, we should be able to have that shortly after that meeting in a couple of weeks' time. So later this month, yes. That's the reason we're having that decision go to the TC this month and not with the rest of the formula programs, because the change is with the administrative set aside instead of having the 4% redistributed the unused portion and then take 2% off the top for the administrative set aside, which to address Heather's point, we want to make sure as much of these funds go to actual projects themselves and not towards administration. I think the goal of this right here is to look at how we can improve on some of the issues that we have here and not necessarily create a huge oversight process. And I appreciate the comments that have come out from everybody on here. And before we have anything put out into stone, what I want to take a look at your comments, see what we can do, and then officially notify you of anything that comes out here through myself and the applicable RTD, because it has a number of folks have different ways of doing this. At a minimum, we have to be compliant with state statute and federal statute when we have on these. And some of these are good ideas if they haven't been gone on before. And to Gary, your point, yeah, it was pretty hectic during those times. I wasn't necessarily involved. I was like 3 jobs ago. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but we'll take a look at some of these on where it makes sense and appropriate and adjust as need be. And that's why we brought it up today, is to get your feedback and is this appropriate or not? And I think one of the things that we may ask, if it's not too much of a huge deal, is kind of see where some of those issues are at on here. If it was it a specific project type? Was it on a state highway? Those types of things. So maybe we can narrow down specific issues. And having some guidance, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but we want to make sure that it's useful and helps us work together better and get through some of the issues like colors of money not being compatible, or we have a utility issue on this project and now we have to double the project cost, or whatever issues coming up on there. So that was probably more than what you expect.
Just a quick follow-up. Sure. This, and I appreciate all that, but so the 24 money, I'm assuming would automatically be rolled since we don't have those totals yet. We haven't programmed them. So I'd assume that would be automatically rolled. And then also an invitation to you, Michael, to present at our TAC.
Okay. Yeah, very well. And actually, so in the next steps, you'll see the last one we're talking about, setting up and holding a couple webinar for applicants. What that also doesn't say though, is that we do intend to come to all the TPRs and TAC meetings and talk about, as we always have, any updates, just so that your members, but also potential applicants have an opportunity to ask questions there. So by that time, we'll know those actual numbers, which keep changing all the time, right? The revenues from the retail fees are constantly getting updated as they roll in, so those numbers change. Hence the reason we don't keep giving you new numbers. It would be every few weeks it would do that. So we'll have final numbers for you when we come back, and we'll talk about those at this STAC meeting in June.
Absolutely. I'll add on because I forgot to mention on your question rolling forward. I will ask Jeff, but my assumption is yes, they will roll forward on there. I don't see a case where it wouldn't roll forward on that particular item. And as far as the recommendation goes, staff has no problem with the recommendation. So we think unless the TC has some specific questions, we expect that to go forward pretty smoothly in May. But we'll see.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, our next meeting is June 6th. Actually, there it is right there on the board. So, and it's a virtual meeting. Although I think we're going to be having more in-person meetings as we get more into the planning process. But none have been scheduled other than the one in October. Any other questions?
But if I could, Mr. Chair, we are open to suggestions if an in-person meeting is valuable. I think sometimes it's valuable to have everybody in the room to be able to talk out some of these issues, and also open to potential venues where, of course, this room is always available if folks would like to come and visit us at our lovely headquarters building, but open to potential other ideas if that's okay with my boss as well.
Okay, anybody else?
I think as we move through the planning process, especially as we start gearing up, it's important to be where we can share issues. It's much better in person for that broad discussion. And make sure we allow enough time. Because the planning is our big portion of what we're supposed to be doing, and I think the in-person is important.
Anybody else?
Dr. Cog in the past has suggested that if we want more in-person meetings, that it's appropriate and reasonable to rotate the location so they're not always in Denver. And I think we're willing to travel to outstate locations for in-person STAC meetings occasionally too. And I think
So I guess, Mr. Chair, is where we would be open to suggestions to see what the logistics would be, because I want to be fair to our staff that we'll have to start planning right now if that's what the STAC wishes to do. We just want to, with the 10 minutes that we have left, if it's June, probably a decision now, so that way we can get logistics in place. Otherwise, we can at least put a placeholder here if a June meeting is wanted in person. Unless there's some other suggestion.
Okay. Anybody disagree? They'd rather not have an in-person meeting in June? Yeah. Can't cross the bridge though.
I mean, I think as long as there's a hybrid option, it is a lot for us to drive from the Western Slope to Denver for a meeting. So it'd be nice if it was like in the mountains halfway, but yeah, as long as there's a hybrid option, I think it's fine.
There will always be a hybrid option. We want to make sure that it's available for folks who cannot attend, and we will stream it live on YouTube as well for folks that aren't in the actual Zoom meeting platform.
Okay, so if I don't have any disagreements, then we'll do an in-person meeting in June. And CDOT will send out the appropriate notices. Well, that's what I'm looking at. Darius. Okay, so want to let everybody know that not immediately after, but shortly after, scheduled for 1 o'clock is the TPR Administrators Meeting is right here. And if nothing else is to be brought before the STAC, we'll call it adjourned. I have a hard time looking in three places at the same